Chapter 3874. This giant tortoise was clearly the original body of the void tortoise, but its size was much, much smaller. At this moment, the old tortoise was silently floating in the void. It was unknown how many years it had been silent. No matter how the void turbulence in the void cracks surged and eroded, the giant tortoise's dark and terrifying body was not damaged at all. It had never been shaken. Moreover, on the giant tortoise's back that was as vast as a terrifying continent, there was a terrifying black demonic blade. It was unknown how many thousands of miles long the blade was, but a small half of it had been inserted into the tortoise's back. It was incomparably sharp. This devil blade was gray in color and revealed blood-green markings. It was extremely evil, and it revealed a sort of evil aura that shook the soul. At the instant one looked at it, it actually caused one to have the misconception that a strand of brutal and monstrous shapeless devil flames was surging and surging over to assault the face. Moreover, the exposed half of the demonic blade was covered with hideous gaps, silently telling how tragic the battle it had experienced in the past was. Although the demonic blade's power was similarly dim and not as fierce as before, the faint aura that faintly revealed was no different from the energy demonic blade condensed by Tuoba Linfeng's bloodline ability, demonic flame space //. If there was a difference, it would be this blade that was inserted vertically on the giant tortoise's back. The black demonic blade on the giant tortoise's back was solid. When Tuoba Linfeng was fighting with Xianxia, he suddenly waved his hand and shot out a faint light from his glabella. In less than half a breath, it turned into a mountain demonic blade, but it was illusory. The demonic blade had been damaged, and the giant tortoise was dormant. This scene had been going on for countless years and had never changed. The demonic blade that Tuoba Linfeng used at that time was actually condensed from a kind of incomplete ability called demonic flame space //. Once it was used, the corpse energy in the body would instantly condense and take shape. Its power was terrifying and evil, and it could even absorb the opponent's vitality, chi, blood, and soul power. It could be called a secret technique of the corpse Tao. In that battle, the blood-green demonic blade that hovered above Tuoba Linfeng's head made Xianxia feel a kind of fear and trepidation. It even made him wonder if the ancient being who left behind that bloodline ability in the primordial era really had a real demonic saber in his hands. Just the energy form of the demonic blade that was condensed from the corpse energy was already so terrifying. Even Xianxia's quasi-starry sky treasure-level battle weapon, Withered Demon Bloodblade, was slightly inferior. If this fierce blade really had a real body, its demonic power was simply unimaginable. This was what Xianxia saw in his heart at that time. He didn't expect that everything was confirmed now. In the primordial age, there was indeed such a supreme demonic blade. No one knew which enemy powerhouse it belonged to, but it was definitely a supreme existence in the primordial age. Otherwise, how could it hurt the void giant turtle? Up until now, this supreme ominous blade was still stuck in the back of the giant void tortoise. This was definitely a scene that had appeared since the primordial era millions and millions of years ago. It had continued until now, and it made one tremble with fear. For hundreds of millions of years, the giant tortoise's body had such a demonic blade. Thinking of this, Xianxia's eyes turned red and he clenched his fists. After all, his cultivation method, the hollow void tactics, originated from the hollow void giant tortoise. In a sense, the hollow void giant tortoise could be regarded as a kind of master in the starry sky environment. It wasn't just Xianxia. In fact, the moment he saw the giant tortoise in the void crack in the distance, the headless corpse reacted. Xianxia clearly felt that the corpse lamp tattoo on his left chest suddenly became more scorching hot, faintly revealing a strong sense of anger. But the headless corpse didn't immediately make a move. It suppressed its anger and was probably waiting for the right time. After all, the netherworld furnace had only come to this ancient void full of cracks, but it hadn't entered the crack where the giant tortoise was. Now was not the best time to make a move. Xianxia also suppressed the anger and impulse in his heart. He took a deep breath and began to search for information about the black demonic blade in the devouring system's database. Previously, the system hadn't come into contact with the black demonic blade, so the database was almost blank. There was only a little information about the energy-form demonic blade in Tuoba Linfeng's hands. But now it was different. The main body of the black demonic blade had already appeared and was seen by Xianxia. Although he hadn't personally come into contact with it, with Xianxia's estimation, the devouring system was more or less able to deduce and analyze some information. Currently, the system's database contained data related to this black demonic blade. It should have been updated. This time, Yi Xian wasn't disappointed. Because he had only seen the black demonic blade's true form through the void crack in the distance, he hadn't come into contact with it personally. Therefore, the system didn't deduce much information about it, especially the specific grade. There was almost no information about its current grade, status, and so on. But for its origin, the system had a rough deduction result. This black demonic blade was suspected to be a supreme ominous blade from the heavenly demon realm called the demonic blade. Its grade should be a primordial treasure. Although it couldn't be compared to the Shennon cauldron and the netherworld furnace, it came from the mysterious heavenly demon realm and was related to the legendary heavenly demon realm. Because it was related to demons, its power was also extremely strange and powerful. Otherwise, this blade wouldn't have been able to stay on the back of the void tortoise for countless years, acting as a kind of suppression to prevent the void tortoise from recovering from its injuries. As for its current grade and status, the system couldn't deduce it. However, looking at the demonic blade's chipped body, its power should be very limited. This kind of primordial treasure-level murderous weapon must have a powerful blade spirit inside. Otherwise, this blade wouldn't have been able to suppress the void tortoise. Over the countless years, the void tortoise had never recovered because of the entanglement of this demonic blade, and its injuries might even be getting worse. However, this situation was also relative, because this kind of stalemate was originally a kind of mutual consumption. The void tortoise was about to be dragged to death, but this demonic blade wasn't any better. After all these years of entanglement, the two had formed a delicate and stable balance between each other. No one was stronger than the other, not even a little bit stronger. Under such circumstances, if there was an external force to break this stalemate balance, it wouldn't be difficult to save the void tortoise. Realizing this, Yi Xian's eyes flashed, and he instantly became excited. He had a strong premonition that this time, he would definitely be able to save the void tortoise. To him, this was not only the meaning of finally obtaining the complete Dongshu ancient chant, but more importantly, his own. Chapter 3875. In addition to the void crack where the void giant tortoise was, there were other void cracks in this ancient and mysterious void. They were densely packed, one after another. Almost every fissure had one or two primordial beings in it. These creatures had different auras. Some were primordial era supremes, some were primordial era mighty figures, and some were even weaker than primordial era mighty figures. Even their state of existence was different. Some were full of vitality. Clearly, after a long period of hibernation, they had mostly recovered from the injuries they sustained in the primordial era battle. It was almost time for them to return to the world in their peak state. It was not far away. As for some, they had already turned into corpses. The injuries left behind in that incomparable battle back then were too severe. Furthermore, they did not receive a top-grade resource like the source of all evil, so they were unable to hold on and ultimately died. What remained in the void cracks were merely corpses, but they still retained the pressure and aura they had when they were alive. It was obvious that they were extremely powerful beings. However, most of them were extremely weak like the void tortoise. Some were in slightly better condition, but they could only be considered as primordial era creatures who had yet to recover from their injuries. As far as Yi Xian could see, he could see ancient creatures that had long been extinct in the three great universes of the current world. It was impossible to see them again. Blue Luan, Silver Dragon, Blue Fire Elephant, Golden Crow, Mutated Unicorn. However, it was hard to tell which camp these primordial era creatures belonged to in the primordial era battle. Perhaps the creatures of the desolate era in the spatial rifts were from both sides. Who knows? The primordial era battle must have been very tragic. The experts from both camps who were lucky enough to survive did not care too much. They randomly found a void crack, plunged into it, and began to hibernate to recover. This was very likely. However, for the void refining array with the netherworld furnace as the center, this mysterious void crack was definitely of great significance. It was an excellent source of raw materials. However, when the void refining array was set up by the Heavenly Tao's green eye after the primordial era battle, it clearly did not make this mysterious void crack into a void crack connected by raw materials. Either the Heavenly Tao's green eye hadn't discovered this void at that time, or there was some other reason that made him think otherwise. But no matter which one it was, it didn't matter to the current netherworld furnace. After this round of evolution, the netherworld furnace had developed a basic level of self-awareness. It was as if it had a spirit of its own, and could now leave the origin of all evil and enter other planes of existence to hunt. This was the reason he had come to this mysterious void. While Yi Xian was mulling over all of this, the hunt for the netherworld furnace finally began. Hua! Walala! The sound of chains rang out, interrupting Yi Xian's train of thought. His gaze was drawn over, causing Yi Xian's gaze to freeze. In his line of sight, the chains of the netherworld furnace had already started moving again, sweeping towards the nearest spatial crack. In that spatial crack, there was clearly a 3,000 zhang long silver dragon, but from the looks of it, it should have already fallen. Even so, the silver dragon's 3,000 zhang long body was still shining with silver light. It emitted a dazzling light. Its aura was still oppressive, and there was a hideous wound on its back that occupied a third of its long and narrow body. Silver dragon blood could be seen that had not dried up yet. This was definitely an extremely powerful silver dragon. Even if its cultivation strength had not reached the level of the primordial era when it was alive, it was not far from it. Walala! Thousands of chains swung out at the same time, each of them millions of li long. They were all like giant pythons in the starry sky, appearing extremely agile and extraordinary. These thousands of chains pierced into the spatial crack at the same time, locking onto the corpse of the silver dragon. They directly tied it up, wrapped around it, and pulled it out fiercely. In the blink of an eye, the silver dragon's corpse was pulled out of the spatial crack. With a light toss, it fell into the mouth of the netherworld furnace and fell into it. It landed in the empty space around the central millstone. Obviously, this time, the netherworld furnace was only dispatched to hunt. Therefore, the central region millstone would not be activated. All the prey would return to the source of all evil star region after the hunt was over. Then, they would be sucked into the central region millstone and crushed into mud. Coincidentally, the position where the silver dragon was thrown into the space inside the netherworld furnace was not far from Yi Xian. As if it was specially given to him, Yi Xian only needed to wave his hand and use the power of the Shenong furnace to absorb it into the space inside the furnace. Looking at the silver dragon's corpse, Yi Xian's eyes flashed with a bright light, and he was extremely envious. He still had a few more minor breakthroughs before he could advance to the grand circle of the cosmic light realm. At that time, he would use the level 15 liquid, and the level 16 liquid would become his top priority. Even though this time, because he had found the void tortoise's body, he had reconnected the broken path of cultivation in the ancient Dongshu chant. However, to Yi Xian, this kind of cultivation method was similar to body tempering, and he could not give up on it. Cultivating both the cultivation method and the physical body at the same time, and advancing at the same time, his battle prowess would be even more powerful. He, who was originally stronger than other powerhouses of the same level, would become a true monster of the present age. Therefore, the level 16 liquid was the level 17 and level 18 liquid that Yi Xian had to start refining. Top-grade treasured blood and flesh like the silver dragon's corpse would be the best material. To Yi Xian, it was rare and valuable. However, now was not the time to collect it. In any case, the silver dragon's corpse had not been thrown into the central millstone to be crushed into mud. Yi Xian could wait until the netherworld furnace had hunted a considerable amount of such top-grade treasures before making a move. He would clean it up in one go, and then quickly withdraw and leave. Walala! The strange sound of the chains continued. This was the netherworld furnace's first hunt after its evolution, and it obviously would not give up so easily. A single silver dragon's corpse was far from enough to satisfy it. However, this mysterious void had a large number of void cracks, and each crack contained one or two extremely powerful primordial life forms that had suffered extremely heavy injuries. To the netherworld furnace, this was a hunting paradise. After coming to such a place, how could it not enjoy itself? With a clatter, the netherworld cauldron drifted forward. After a short while, it arrived not far from a spatial rift. Immediately after, thousands of rune chains that were millions of kilometers long shot out, charging into the spatial rift and plunging into it. In this void crack, there was the corpse of a blue Luan. It was still thousands of feet long, and it had already fallen. This blue Luan was the netherworld furnace's second target. Chapter 3876. In less than half a day, the netherworld furnace attacked again and again. At this time, the number of corpses of powerful ancient creatures that had been thrown into the netherworld furnace had already numbered in the hundreds. However, all of them had already fallen long ago, and not a single one was left alive. During this process, Yi Xian had always been hiding in the netherworld furnace, paying close attention to everything. He did not make any movements, but his heart was gradually rising and falling, and he was somewhat excited. Because from the direction of the netherworld furnace's hunt, it was clearly heading straight for the spatial crack where the void tortoise was. It would not be long before it arrived at the region where the spatial crack was located. Presumably, Yi Xian would be able to find a suitable opportunity at that time to take action and rescue the void tortoise. Walala! The chains made strange sounds. This time, out of the nearly 10,000 rune chains, a total of 3,000 shook at the same time. Like giant pythons in the starry sky, they shot toward the spatial crack on the right side. In the previous hundreds of attacks, the netherworld furnace had only used a single chain each time, but this time, it used 3 times the number of chains. Even Yi Xian was surprised and subconsciously turned his head to look. Then his heart trembled. No wonder so many rune chains were used this time. There was obviously a reason for this, and the reason was very simple. The target that the netherworld furnace had locked onto this time was completely different from the previous hundreds of times. Even though they were both powerful ancient creatures, this time, the one the netherworld furnace was going to hunt was a living ancient creature, one that hadn't died yet, turning into a corpse. This was a blue fire elephant. Its body was thousands of feet tall, and its cultivation should be below that of a powerful ancient figure, but it was still extremely powerful. When these primordial creatures revealed their true forms, they obviously couldn't be just 3,000 feet tall. However, they were in a state of hibernation while recovering from their injuries in the spatial rifts. That was why they didn't look very large. This blue fire elephant's entire body was burning with blue flames, rising endlessly. The recovery of its injuries was not ideal. Although it was not at its last gasp, it was still very weak. It was originally in a state of hibernation, but it clearly had some kind of feeling. The moment the 3,000 mysterious rune chains rushed into the spatial crack, the hibernating blue fire elephant suddenly opened its eyes. Primordial beings of this level all possessed astonishing senses, and what was even more extraordinary was their ability to sense danger. Although the green fire elephant was in a deep sleep, it had a premonition that a great calamity was about to descend, so it suddenly woke up in a hurry. Immediately after, it let out an angry moo. The loud sound broke through the clouds, and the entire space crack trembled slightly. Fortunately, there was only one ancient creature, the blue fire elephant, in this spatial crack. Otherwise, if there were others, they would have been awakened in the first moment. Walala! Within the raining chains, at least several hundred chains pierced through the azure fire elephant's body. In an instant, azure precious blood flowed out, and each drop blossomed with a dazzling radiance. Within, there seemed to be an azure flame rising, illuminating every wound on the azure fire elephant's body with an azure color. It was a gorgeous and dense feeling. The blue fire elephant let out a miserable howl, and its body struggled fiercely. However, the other chains also wrapped around it, binding its body tightly, and it could not break free at all. After a short confrontation, the blue fire elephant was at a disadvantage in the end. Its injuries were too severe, and there was still a several hundred zhong long hideous wound under its abdomen. The netherworld furnace was very vicious, and the several hundred rune chains that pierced the blue fire elephant's body came from this hideous wound. Otherwise, with this kind of ancient creature's rough skin and flesh, and the netherworld furnace's chains were not sharp weapons, it was impossible to so easily pierce through. In the end, after a period of stalemate and entanglement, the heavily injured blue fire elephant gradually weakened until it was on the verge of death. Its skull was pierced through by a rune chain that extended into its body from the wound on its abdomen, from the inside out. At this point, the blue fire elephant fell, and there were no longer any signs of struggle. It was pulled into the netherworld furnace by these 3,000 rune chains. The whole process was extremely fast, but it was very shocking. Even Yi Xian did not blink when he saw this. A powerful blue fire elephant whose cultivation was second only to the ancient almighty had fallen just like that. Although it had originally suffered extremely severe injuries and had not recovered, to be able to do this in such a short period of time was still enough to show the power of the netherworld furnace. However, if the headless infant corpse wanted to save this blue fire elephant, it could definitely save this blue fire elephant easily. After all, it was in existence on the same level as the heavenly eye. However, from the beginning to the end, the headless infant corpse did not make any strange movements. It was calm. Or it could be said that it was so cold that it made people feel that it was somewhat inconceivable. There could only be one reason for this, and that was that there was a problem with the camp of this blue fire elephant. In that incomparable battle in the ancient era, it was definitely not on the side of the headless infant corpse, but on the side of the opposing camp, the heavenly eye. From this, One could see the ruthlessness and viciousness of the heavenly eye. Even if the injuries of a primordial being on their side were too severe, there was no reason for them to treat it like this, right? They actually wanted to directly kill this blue fire elephant, drag it into the netherworld furnace, and use it as a raw material for refining the all-evil origin elixir. It was said that the heavenly eye was heartless, treating all living things as dogs. This was simply the most realistic portrayal. When this azure fire elephant was thrown into the netherworld furnace, although it still had a breath of life left, it was already on the verge of death. If it was a creature from the primordial era on their side, Xianxia might have considered whether or not to take the risk and save them. Moreover, the headless corpse of the infant would probably do the same. However, since it was in existence on the side of the heavenly eye, there was naturally no need for this. Xianxia looked on coldly from the side, remaining dormant. As for the netherworld furnace, after hunting this blue fire elephant, it did not waste any time. It moved forward again, charging into the void ahead, approaching the next spatial crack. Time passed very quickly. In the blink of an eye, another 3 days had passed. By now, the number of corpses of primordial beings in the netherworld furnace had already reached over 2,000. Among them, there were only a few dozen that still had a single breath left. However, these several dozen primordial beings were clearly not on the side of the headless infant corpse. This was because when the latter was ruthlessly hunting them in the netherworld furnace, the headless infant corpse on Xianxia's left chest did not react at all. However, the mysterious energy that protected Xian and concealed all of his aura was still present. This meant that the infant corpse had always been in an awakened state, paying close attention to everything inside and outside the netherworld furnace. Chapter 3877. Currently, there were close to 3,000 primordial life forms in the dark cauldron. Apart from the dozens of beings on the side of the eye of the heavenly Tao who were still on the brink of death, the rest had been dead for a long time and were no longer breathing. The auras of these primordial life forms were very powerful. The weakest among them was at the immortal rank, while the strongest had an aura similar to that of the golden divine dragon and the void tortoise. They should be at the primordial supreme level. Xian had briefly seen immortal rank existences in the ancestral grounds of the Space Rat clan and the Hell Ant clan, so he could still distinguish immortal rank auras. Before the Dark Cauldron evolved this time, the lowest requirement for raw materials to refine the all-evil elixir was at the universe rank. The remains of primordial life forms at the Sector Lord rank that were lower than the universe rank were directly spat out as waste. However, this time, the lowest requirement for the remains of primordial life forms that the Dark Cauldron hunted had been raised to the immortal rank from the universe rank in the past. Xian was keenly aware of this because not a single one of the 3,000 remains of primordial life forms in the Dark Cauldron was at the universe rank. Perhaps it was because the Dark Cauldron had evolved once and was now able to refine the all-evil elixir of better quality. However, Xian couldn't be sure if this was the case. However, he could verify it later. After this hunt, once the Dark Cauldron returned to the origin of all evil, a new round of refinement would begin immediately. This was originally supposed to happen a year later, but now it was brought forward. Similarly, he couldn't be sure if it was because the Dark Cauldron had evolved once. Perhaps it was because of the machine. Or perhaps there was another reason that caused the Eye of the Heavenly Tao to change the annual refinement schedule. Regardless of which reason it was, when the Dark Cauldron returned to the origin of all evil and ended the refinement, there should be a result when the product was produced. Regardless of whether the all-evil elixir refined this time was of the same quality or better than before, and regardless of how the product would be distributed or used, Xian wouldn't let it go easily. He would definitely do his best to seize it for himself, even if it would alarm the Heavenly Tao's eyes again. Therefore, Xian did not plan to loot all of the remains of the nearly 3,000 ancient creatures in the netherworld cauldron. Otherwise, it would cause too much of a commotion and alert the Heavenly Tao in advance. Rather than taking everything away, it would be better to take only a portion that he needed and leave the rest for the netherworld furnace. He would let it return to the star field of the source of all evil and refine it again. In any case, Xian wouldn't miss out on the product of this refinement. This was even better. It was equivalent to letting the netherworld furnace use the remains of the primordial life forms that were deliberately left behind to refine for him for free. After making the decision, Xian immediately took action. The headless infant corpse's protection was still in effect. Not only was Xian completely unharmed under the pressure of the netherworld cauldron, not even a trace of his aura leaked out. He was in the netherworld cauldron, but the netherworld cauldron couldn't sense him. This greatly facilitated his movements. There were almost no restrictions on his movements. He moved smoothly in the netherworld cauldron, choosing suitable remains of primordial creatures. There were nearly 3,000 primordial supreme-level remains in the netherworld cauldron, but there were only slightly more than 20 of them. Yi Xian took half of them and put them into the Shengnong cauldron with a wave of his hand. The rest were primordial supreme-level remains, but there weren't many primordial supreme-level remains. There were only a few hundred of them, and Yi Xian also took half of them. The remaining 2,000 were primordial creatures below the primordial supreme level. The weakest was at the immortal level, but Yi Xian didn't know what the strongest was. He only knew that above the Star Lord level was the Domain Lord level, above the Domain Lord level was the Sector Lord level, above the Sector Lord level was the Universe level, and above the Universe level was the Immortal level. As for the realm after the Immortal level, Yi Xian didn't have any relevant information. In fact, Yi Xian didn't even know how many realms there were between the Immortal level and the Primordial Supreme level. From the bottom to the top, he only knew that there were realms from the Star Core level to the Immortal level, and it stopped at the Immortal level. From the top to the bottom, he only knew that below the Heavenly Tao's Green Eye and the Headless Infant Corpse, the strongest was the Primordial Supreme level, followed by the Primordial Supreme level, and it stopped at the Primordial Supreme level. As for what was below the Primordial Supreme level, he had no clue at all. But it didn't matter. As his cultivation base increased, he would come in contact with higher realms. There would be a day when he would understand the entire system of realms. Right now, Yi Xian had only symbolically taken away 200 to 300 of the 2,000 or so corpses of the supreme beings of the primordial era. The rest were all left in the netherworld furnace. On one hand, he couldn't take too many, or he would be exposed. On the other hand, he did want to leave more raw materials so that the netherworld cauldron could condense more products this time. After all, they would all end up in his pocket in the end. 13 supreme beings of the primordial era, more than 200 supreme beings of the primordial era, more than 200 supreme beings of the primordial era, and more than 200 supreme beings of the primordial era. This was Yi Xian's current harvest. Although it didn't seem like much compared to the total amount of remains in the netherworld cauldron, Yi Xian would have to rely on luck if he wanted to obtain even one of these remains in another place. In a sense, this harvest was definitely comparable to the last time he entered the netherworld cauldron and stole more than 2,000 drops of all evil origin liquid and other supplementary products. Most importantly, the netherworld cauldron still didn't detect any abnormalities this time. Although Yi Xian took away nearly 500 primordial supreme level remains, the interior of the netherworld cauldron was still as calm as ever. This was simply too exciting. The entire process didn't take long, only a few hours. Yi Xian had already completed everything. At this time, the netherworld cauldron was still moving forward, and it was already much closer to the void crack where the void giant tortoise was. If there were no accidents and no delays along the way, the netherworld cauldron would arrive at the void crack in at most 4 to 6 hours. According to Yi Xian's judgment and deduction, the netherworld cauldron would definitely not let the void giant tortoise go once it got close to the void crack. It would definitely hunt and pull the void giant tortoise into the netherworld cauldron. It could be said that the time was ripe for a rescue. However, Yi Xian was suddenly a little hesitant. He was conflicted whether he should take the initiative to rescue the void giant tortoise before the netherworld cauldron took action, or wait until the void giant tortoise was pulled into the netherworld cauldron by the netherworld cauldron and take him away. Chapter 3878. Walala. Just as Yi Xian was hesitating and unable to make up his mind, the sound of the chains of the netherworld furnace once again rang out. It approached a spatial rift to the right and quickly dragged out the remains of an immortal-level desolate ancient creature. Then, it moved forward again and got much closer to the void crack where the void tortoise was. 2 hours later, the remains of several dozen primordial creatures were dragged into the netherworld cauldron by the chains. Now, the netherworld cauldron was extremely close to the void crack where the void giant tortoise was. Along the way, there were only 3 void cracks on the left and right. In other words, the netherworld furnace could attack 3 more times at most. Then, it would reach the void crack where the void tortoise was. If Yi Xian decided to take the initiative and rush out of the netherworld furnace to rescue the void tortoise, he could not delay any longer. Otherwise there would not be enough time. In less than 2 hours, the netherworld furnace would attack the void tortoise. Yi Xian gritted his teeth and moved his body slightly. He was about to rush out of the netherworld furnace. At this moment, he suddenly felt a burning sensation on the left side of his chest. The headless corpse seemed to know what he was thinking and warned Yi Xian not to act rashly. Although there weren't any more hints, Xian slightly frowned due to his trust in the infant's corpse. He no longer acted on impulse and stopped moving. He continued to lie dormant within the furnace, but he was prepared to act at any time. After all, the headless corpse did not want him to take action now. However, it would not sit and watch the void tortoise be killed by the netherworld furnace. At the critical moment, it would definitely take action. Half an hour later, another 3 corpses were dragged over and tossed into the netherworld cauldron. This time, the netherworld cauldron had finally reached the edge of the void crack where the void tortoise was. Originally, the void tortoise was in a state of hibernation because of its weak body. However, its eyes had long been opened. Through the void crack, it vigilantly watched the netherworld furnace slowly approaching the void crack. The netherworld furnace had been tossing and turning in this mysterious and ancient void for 3 or 4 days, so its movements were not small. The void giant tortoise was a supreme existence in the remote antiquity era. Even if it was not in good condition, it could even be said to be extremely worrisome. However, if it was not alarmed by this, it would be too illogical. As the netherworld furnace approached the void crack, Xian's heart was in his throat in an instant. If the netherworld furnace's murderous aura was too strong and showed that it wanted to kill the void tortoise and then drag its corpse into the netherworld furnace, he would not hesitate to make a move, even if the headless infant's corpse gave him a warning. Clang, clang, clang. At this moment, the sound of chains suddenly rang out. The netherworld furnace had taken action. This time, more than 10,000 rune chains suddenly moved at the same time. Like more than 10,000 void pythons, they shot in one direction with incomparable agility. In the blink of an eye, they passed through the void crack where the void tortoise was located. With a shocking murderous aura, they smashed towards the void tortoise. This was definitely the rhythm of killing the void tortoise. Before this, the netherworld furnace had only used 4,000 rune chains, and it had hunted a powerful desolation-era creature with a strong aura. Its injuries had recovered 30 to 40%. But this time, more than 10,000 rune chains moved at the same time. The murderous aura vaguely revealed was much stronger. Its purpose was to directly kill the void tortoise in the void crack in front of it, and then drag it into the netherworld furnace. What else could it be? Buzz. As if sensing the netherworld furnace's purpose, a cheerful buzzing sound suddenly rang out from the void crack in front of it. It even passed through the void crack and reached the ancient void outside. The demonic blade that was stabbed into the void tortoise's back. More than half of its blade had already entered the flesh of the void tortoise's back. Suddenly, it trembled slightly, as if it was cheering wildly. Once the void tortoise fell and was killed, it would be as if it was free. Although the blade was damaged, it could still be considered heartless. It would then use all its strength to repair itself. Xian's scalp went numb, and his eyes were about to split open. He watched as the 10,000 rune chains shot into the spatial rift, and without exception, they all shot towards the void tortoise. Every single chain emitted an incomparably dense aura of slaughter and killing intent. This was definitely a fatal blow, and with the void tortoise's current state, its back in the void tortoise's current state, there was another demonic blade that was inserted into its body. This was definitely 100 deaths. Obviously, the netherworld furnace knew that this was a supreme primordial being from the headless infant corpse's camp. Moreover, it was not an ordinary supreme primordial being. Even among the supreme primordial beings from the headless infant corpse's camp, this supreme primordial being was one of the top existences. Therefore, either he didn't make a move, or he would definitely not make a move. His hands were extremely iron-blooded, and he didn't give the void tortoise any chance of survival. However, this was definitely not what Xian wanted to see. A murderous aura rose from his heart. At this moment, Xian was about to make a move. Whoosh! Right at this moment, a faint purplish-black light that was like the light of a firefly shot out from Xian's left chest at the same time. Its speed was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it rushed out of the netherworld furnace and passed through the void crack in front of it. In less than half an instant, it had crossed an endless distance and landed on the void tortoise's head. It entered the back of its head and disappeared in a flash. Screech! An earth-shattering screech suddenly exploded. The void crack in front of it couldn't bear it and directly collapsed, becoming one with the ancient void outside. It was unknown what the purplish-black light that shot out from the corpse lamp tattoo was. It was obviously as weak as the light of a firefly. If Xian hadn't felt it himself, he was afraid that he wouldn't have been able to catch it. However, its power was so terrifying. The void tortoise, who was originally on the verge of death, suddenly seemed to have taken drugs after this faint purplish-black light entered its body. Its aura suddenly blazed. When it raised its head and roared, not only did it directly collapse the void crack, but even the sword that was inserted on its back also entered its body. Half of the heavenly demon blade was forced out in an instant. With a whoosh, it transformed into a black ray of light that pierced into the distant end of the ancient void and completely disappeared. That kind of aura that disappeared in an instant actually gave people the feeling that it was fleeing in panic in a sorry state. At the same time, the heavenly demon blade that had suppressed it for countless years disappeared. The aura of the void tortoise also became more and more blazing. Although its body shape didn't change, the aura pressure that was emitted from its body almost rose in a geometrical state at an extremely fast speed. Moreover, before the screech that shook the void crack to the point of collapse fell, the void tortoise had already turned its head and swept its gaze toward the netherworld furnace. Chapter 3879. As the headless infant corpse made its move, the situation was reversed almost instantly. The void tortoise was originally in a situation of certain death, but all of this changed in an instant. All of this made Xianxia aghast. He had long known that the headless infant corpse was in existence on the same level as the heavenly Tao's green eye. He had even guessed the true origin and background of the headless infant corpse. But even so, Xianxia still didn't expect that the headless infant corpse could be so powerful. Just a wisp of weak purplish-black light, like a firefly's glow, shot out from the corpse lamp tattoo, was able to make the severely injured Supreme Primordial Lord, who was on the verge of death, instantly release a powerful battle strength. At this moment, Xianxia's face was full of shock. His mind was full of question marks. He didn't understand what the weak purplish-black light was. But regarding this, he obviously couldn't get an answer immediately. In fact, the current situation didn't even allow him to dwell on this matter too much. Because when the void tortoise turned its head to look, its gaze seemed to ignore the distance in the void and the obstruction of the power of the netherworld furnace. It actually strangely met Xianxia's gaze. Yes, although they were separated by the void, although one side was outside the netherworld furnace, and the other side was inside the netherworld furnace, and even Xianxia was still under the protection of the headless infant corpse's power. His aura had been perfectly concealed, but at this moment, Xianxia had an incomparably clear understanding. His gaze. At this moment, the void tortoise had definitely seen him. This, perhaps, was because of the mysterious purplish-black light that shot out from the corpse lamp tattoo and entered the void tortoise's body. But whether this was true or not, it was no longer important to Xianxia. The most important thing was that this time, they looked at each other from afar. It was so short that they only looked at each other for a single breath. Xianxia's gains were so great that his mind couldn't help but tremble. Not because of fear but because of excitement. With just a single glance, Xianxia's mind seemed to be filled with boundless tempestuous waves. In an instant, it exploded, and endless obscure information appeared out of thin air. In the end, all of this obscure information gathered together in an instant, fusing into an ancient tortoise shell that entered Xianxia's sea of consciousness and floated above it. This tortoise shell represented the complete inheritance of the void tortoise bloodline. At this point, there were a total of 9 objects suspended above Xianxia's sea of consciousness. In the center was the Rai Di seal and the Farmer God Cauldron. Surrounding the Thunder Emperor seal and the Farmer God Cauldron were 7 small items. The Spirit Source Core, the Void Essence Crystal, the Fallen Sky Bow, the Black Gold Dragon Scale, the Netherclaw, the Primordial Demonic Ape, and the ancient tortoiseshell he had just entered. Every one of these 9 objects was no small matter. An ordinary starry sky powerhouse could soar to the heavens with just one, but Xianxia had all of them. Moreover, this wasn't all of his foundation. Just from this point alone, the rumor that he was one of the 7 peerless monsters in the world was really not a coincidence. And now, as this ancient tortoise shell formed in Xianxia's sea of consciousness, Xianxia had finally obtained the complete inheritance of the void tortoise. The ancient Dongshu chant had been perfected. If Xianxia continued to cultivate with this ancient tortoise shell, as long as he didn't die prematurely, he would one day grow into a void tortoise. He would become a supreme primordial being. This meant too much to Xianxia. But at this moment, he was so excited that he didn't think too much about this problem. Although he had obtained the inheritance, the safety of the void tortoise and whether it could escape from the evil hands of the netherworld cauldron were still unknown. The netherworld cauldron obviously didn't notice the faint purplish-black light that had entered the void tortoise's body. This purplish-black light had shot out from the left side of Xianxia's chest. If it hadn't suddenly heated up, Even Yi Xian might not have been able to detect its existence. Needless to say, the Netherworld Cauldron naturally didn't need to say much about the faint purplish-black light that had entered the Void Tortoise's body. Yes. As an existence on the same level as the Heavenly Tao's green eye, the headless infant corpse still had this ability. Yi Xian was such a big person, and he was inside the Netherworld Cauldron, but he was protected by some kind of mysterious power, let alone a tiny light that was like a firefly's light. Because of this, the Netherworld Cauldron was clearly shocked and bewildered by the sudden unexpected reversal of the Void Tortoise's injuries, which seemed to have recovered by a small half, and the scene of it suddenly becoming lively. It had already given birth to a preliminary self-consciousness, as if it had given birth to an artifact spirit. It more or less possessed a certain level of thinking ability, but it wasn't very mature. The scene in front of it today was different from what it had expected. The Netherworld Cauldron was clearly a little stunned. Yi Xian could clearly feel that the tens of thousands of rune chains were originally extremely agile. His nimble and swift movements suddenly came to a complete halt. Walala! But soon after, the strange sound of the chains rang out again. In the end, the Netherworld Cauldron still didn't stop. The tens of thousands of rune chains were still there, like countless giant pythons in the starry sky, smashing towards the Void Tortoise. Screech! The giant tortoise roared, and a terrifying aura surged out from its body. Without any fear, it directly met the tens of thousands of rune chains that were smashing towards it. The Void Tortoise was planning to fight head-on. It was already furious. Thinking about it, it made sense. After all, he was in existence at the level of the Supreme Primordial Lord. Moreover, among the many Supreme Primordial Lords in the Headless Infant Corpse's camp, he was one of the top existences. Although he didn't participate in that battle, there must be some secret and mission that was carried out in the dark. In the end, he was still seriously injured. He was entangled by the demonic blade of the extraterrestrial demon and stabbed into his back. Hundreds of millions of years had passed, and he had never recovered. In fact, his condition was getting worse and worse. And now, because of the secret help of the Headless Infant Corpse, the Void Tortoise had broken free from the demonic blade that had been entangled for hundreds of millions of years. It had shaken it out of its body and retreated in fear. At this moment of excitement, there was actually a Netherworld Cauldron that rushed forward, wanting to hunt him down like prey. How could the cold arrogance of the Void Tortoise, the Supreme Primordial Lord of the Ancients, hold back this anger? A heaven-shaking battle was already in front of him. If nothing unexpected happened, it would arrive in an instant. Rumble. Gotcha. It was also at this instant that a large expanse of black tribulation clouds suddenly appeared above this expanse of space without the slightest sign. As soon as the tribulation clouds appeared, a black bolt of lightning exploded out in that expanse of space, and the horizon seemed to be on the verge of being split apart as fine cracking sounds that caused one's scalp to go numb resounded. Yi Xian's heart suddenly jumped, and an extremely bad feeling suddenly emerged at this moment. Chapter 3880. The Heavenly Green Eye was alarmed. Its consciousness had already locked onto this mysterious void and was about to descend. The situation was extremely critical at this moment. Once the Heavenly Green Eye descended, not only was the Void Tortoise very likely to die, but it was only the Supreme Primordial Lord after all. Moreover, its injuries had only recovered by 20 to 30%. It was too far from being able to withstand a blow from the Heavenly Green Eye, even if the latter was still heavily injured. In addition, even Yi Xian and the Headless Infant Corpse would be discovered. The Headless Infant Corpse's mysterious protective ability could be hidden from the Netherworld Cauldron, but it definitely could not hide from the Heavenly Green Eye. The two were originally existences of the same level. In the ancient war, each was the commander of the two opposing camps. In that war, the Heavenly Green Eye's camp was very likely to be the winner. Even if it was a Pyrrhic victory, it was still a victory in the end. At least, the Heavenly Green Eye was only heavily injured and hibernating. It took its camp and the entire primordial age to retreat from the grand stage of the long river of time. However, the Headless Infant Corpse had clearly died. Its head was chopped off. If not for some unexpected coincidence, it would not even have the chance to live a second life. From a certain point of view, the Headless Infant Corpse was actually slightly weaker than the Heavenly Green Eye. Under such circumstances, how could the Headless Infant Corpse's mysterious protective ability hide from the Heavenly Green Eye? Screech! At this moment, after sensing that the Heavenly Green Eye was about to descend, the Headless Infant Corpse did not hesitate and directly let out a screech. The netherworld cauldron instantly emitted a purplish-black light, but Yi Xian's figure was not revealed. He was wrapped in this extremely scorching purplish-black light. With a whoosh, it rushed out of the netherworld cauldron and shot toward the void tortoise in front of it, directly landing on its huge back. In the next moment, the purplish-black light shone brightly and separated into a wisp, condensing into a purplish-black heavenly blade. With a slash, it split open a crack in the void. This was clearly the rhythm of an immediate escape. However, unexpectedly, after this crack was split open, the purplish-black light suddenly separated into a wisp again and shot straight toward the black thundercloud in the distant void. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly felt a chill on the left side of his chest at this moment. The original scorching sensation had turned into warmth. This attack instantly weakened the headless infant corpse by a large margin. Screech! The void tortoise raised its head and let out a shrill cry. But Yi Xian's figure, under the guidance of the headless infant corpse on his left chest, to rise to the void tortoise's back. To the void tortoise's back. To the void tortoises. Yi Xian was enlightened. He realized what he should do at this moment. The headless infant corpse was left behind to help the void tortoise escape. Although the latter had the ability to tear through the void and escape, how could it escape the pursuit of the heavenly Tao's eye? However, the headless infant corpse was different. The void crack he tore through with a secret technique was extremely unique. After sending the void tortoise away, once the void was flattened, all traces would be erased. Even the heavenly Tao's eye of the same level would not be able to find any traces. Naturally, it was impossible to carry out the subsequent pursuit. Now, the void tortoise was safe. On the other hand, Yi Xian and the headless infant corpse were getting closer and closer to danger. The headless infant corpse might have the ability to fight with the heavenly Tao's eye that had yet to recover. However, if that was the case, Yi Xian would definitely be exposed. At that time, the heavenly Tao's eye might not be able to find the whereabouts of the headless infant corpse, but it would be too easy to find Yi Xian. No matter what, Yi Xian could not meet it. Otherwise, there would be no end of trouble. After all, the one that had met Yi Xian in the desolate ancient cage was only a consciousness clone of the heavenly Tao's eye. Its ability to deduce was limited. Although it had met Yi Xian, it could deduce more information. However, the true body of the heavenly Tao's eye was different. It was too dangerous to meet it face to face. Yi Xian would be forced into a passive position. Fortunately, Yi Xian had already made preparations to retreat at any time. He immediately ordered the devouring system in his body to use the planar-level interstellar coordinate jump ability. This was just a test because this ancient void was clearly not one of the three great plains. Instead, it was an extraterritorial void. Yi Xian had never activated the interstellar coordinate jump ability in the extraterritorial void of the three great plains. He did not know if it would succeed. Whoosh! Fortunately, the familiar sound of teleportation breaking through the air still appeared in the end. Half an instant before the space in the distance split open, Yi Xian's figure completely disappeared, along with the green light that protected him. Moreover, the way he disappeared was extremely strange. He did not leave a single trace. From this point of view, the devouring system's ability in this aspect was simply heaven-defying. Boom! Crack! The thunderous roar exploded again, followed by the crisp sound of lightning. A huge crack finally appeared in the void in the area densely covered by the black tribulation lightning. The black tribulation clouds automatically parted, and the crack appeared in the center of the tribulation clouds. A corner of a huge green eye appeared, and it was in the middle of the tribulation clouds. It opened. Whoosh! Right at this moment, before the headless infant corpse and Yi Xian left, the wisp of purplish-black light that shot towards the void also arrived. Its speed was extremely fast. It directly pierced into the void crack that had just appeared in the center of the tribulation clouds. With a loud bang, it pierced straight towards the opening of the heavenly Tao's eye. Screech! In the next moment, a vicious howl that shook the heavens and the earth resounded from within this spatial rift. The sky was on the verge of being split apart, and it revealed monstrous resentment and unwillingness that caused one's soul to leave its body. Then came the endless sound of explosions. The endless tribulation clouds on both sides of the crack exploded at the same time. Although the headless infant corpse's sneak attack was successful and the heavenly Tao's eye was hit, it was obviously not serious. However, it stopped him from descending this time. The void crack was slowly closing. And as these thunderous explosions raged, the entire vast and boundless ancient void seemed to be implicated in some way. A large number of void cracks collapsed. Originally, there was a stable connection to this ancient void, but at this moment, a large number of cracks had become blurred and were moving away. In the end, they disappeared. Obviously, this was one of the headless infant corpse's goals. It completely cut off the hundreds of thousands of cracks and the stable connection to this ancient void that had been discovered by the heavenly Tao's eye. Whoosh! Whoosh! Chapter 3881. Hua! Walala. The sound of chains became louder and louder. This ancient void was originally extremely stable, and there were tens of millions of void cracks connected to it. But now the headless infant corpse's final attack before it left had forced the heavenly Tao's green eye to retreat, caught off guard. The tremendous energy that erupted had destroyed at least 80% of the stable channels that connected the cracks in the void to this ancient void. The remaining ones were gradually becoming blurry. Obviously, this ancient void was no longer stable. At the very least, the millions of cracks in the void that were connected to it had disappeared without a trace. For the netherworld furnace, this was definitely an enormous loss. Right now, the clanging sounds of chains rang out like never before, precisely because the netherworld furnace was crashing left and right in this space, brandishing over 10,000 rune chains, wanting to do its best to hunt down as many condensed materials as possible. This was the movement brought about by this final effort. Silence. After a while, the trembling of the void finally stabilized, and the continuous thunderous explosion also disappeared and could no longer be heard. This ancient space had been preserved, but it no longer held much significance to the netherworld furnace. This was originally a rich supply of condensed materials. Even the heavenly Tao's green eye had to rely on chance and luck to find such a place in the endless void turbulence. But now, the millions of void rifts connected to this ancient void had disappeared without a trace. Only a few tens of thousands of them were left, and almost half of them were empty. A rich supply of raw materials turned into a barren land in the blink of an eye. This made the netherworld furnace very angry, but there was nothing it could do. Just now, even the green eye of the heavenly Tao had already descended halfway, but because it lost the initiative, it was forcefully forced back by the enemy. It was merely a precious treasure that the green eye of the heavenly Tao had personally refined, so what could it do? In the end, the netherworld furnace left unwillingly, breaking through the void and returning to the source of all evil. Universe 3, in the territory of the Heavenly Wind Empire under the rule of the human race's science and technology faction's immortal dynasty. A battleship was slowly sailing alone in the void. This was a starry sky fortress with a diameter of 70,000 meters, but it was not a battleship, but a merchant ship. It was just that the surface of the battleship was slightly damaged, giving people the feeling that it had encountered space pirates, broken through the siege, and escaped alone. In the command cabin on the top floor of the small fortress, the atmosphere was a little strange. Although there were many figures in the huge command cabin, at this moment, they were all drinking wine lazily and eating the bloody meat of ferocious beasts. They did not look like merchants, but more like space pirates. Every one of them was full of hostility, and the auras in their bodies were extremely powerful. They were all in the cosmic realm. Like the existences in the universe realm, their auras were all filled with ruthlessness and bloodthirst. Only the figure in the center, like a gentleman at this moment, he was sitting in front of a large table, slowly tasting wine, while holding a knife and fork. He was cutting a large piece of ferocious beast's meat on the plate. Although he was also eating the meat raw and looked quite horrifying, his movements couldn't have been more elegant, as if he were tasting the best beef. He gently cut off a small piece and put it into his mouth with a fork, chewing and swallowing it slowly. He nodded in satisfaction after he swallowed it, then took a sip of wine from a maid nearby and continued cutting the meat. The 1,000 figures in the top cabin were all very young. There were very few female cultivators, and most of them were strong men. Unlike the Cosmic Realm experts were all in the Cosmic Realm. The man who was leisurely drinking wine and tasting the bloody meat was exactly Tuoba Linfeng, the Zombie King. Judging from his aura at this moment, he had already reached the first level of the Star-Lord state. Tuoba Linfeng had successfully made a breakthrough during the previous void hunt. He was already a Star-Lord at the moment. Even the 1,000 or so zombie warriors under the Zombie King's command in the top cabin had improved a lot this time, but none of them had reached the Star-Lord state, and they were still some distance away from that state. And now, thousands of Universe Realm and Universe Realm Universe zombie generals, escorting Emperor Tuoba Linfeng, were still drifting aimlessly in the universe void of the Heavenly Wind Empire territory, patiently waiting for the next target to come knocking on their door. Crack. This is... The wine glass in his hand was crushed in an instant, making a cracking sound. Tuoba Linfeng, who was enjoying the massage of the two beautiful female zombie warriors, had a huge change in expression at this moment. He suddenly stood up in shock, and directly threw the two beautiful female zombie warriors who were half lying on his body to the ground. Tuoba Linfeng didn't even look at them. He had already swept his eyes to the left, and his consciousness quickly extended to the end of the void on the left through the wall of the battleship. Just a moment ago, his celestial demon body suddenly reacted, and a strong feeling of flesh and blood appeared out of thin air from the end of the void on the right. Otherwise, why would Tuoba Linfeng, who had already become a zombie king and a star-lord, be so shocked? Whoosh! As soon as the exclamation sounded, Tuoba Linfeng had already leaped away. His original physical body turned into an illusory existence in an instant. It wasn't a soul, nor was it an energy body, nor was it a consciousness body. It was the celestial demon body from the outer space. As the celestial demon body was activated, Tuoba Linfeng passed through the wall of the zombie fortress like a ghost and shot toward the end of the void on the right. More than 1,000 zombie generals in the top cabin of the fortress looked at each other in confusion, but they didn't hesitate. They immediately got up, rushed out of the zombie fortress, and followed closely behind. Rumble. A huge thunderous explosion sounded, and the entire zombie fortress with a diameter of 70,000 meters suddenly exploded without warning. There was no flame, and it directly disintegrated in the void, turning into 5 giant fortresses with a diameter of 10,000 meters. They were incomparably ferocious, and didn't look like starry sky battleships at all. They gave people the feeling that they were a mixture of flesh and metal. They waved their sharp blades, opened their bloody mouths, and also followed behind. Rushing over. Ha ha ha! Celestial Demon Blade. It's actually the Celestial Demon Blade. The legendary Celestial Demon Blade, actually came in its true form. This Emperor's weapon. Finally found. Thousands of miles ahead, Tuoba Linfeng, who was the first to rush forward, raised his head and laughed wildly, revealing endless ecstasy. After activating the celestial demon body, his perception of the flesh and blood connection in the void ahead was much clearer. At this moment, because he was close, he even felt the presence of his soul, and knew what kind of existence was breaking through the void in front of him. Chapter 3882. Xiao. The sound of something breaking through the air came from the end of the distant void. A black ray of light, displaying a shocking speed, was shooting towards this side. When it was about to reach him, there was an ear-piercing sound of something tearing through the air, and there was even a trembling sound that was clearly filled with joy. When the heavenly devil blade sensed the heavenly devil body in front of it, it was also rejoicing and cheering. Heavens, what is that? A battle blade, such a fierce demonic aura. This is definitely a supreme demonic blade. A great treasure. The rhythm of a great treasure appearing. Stop it immediately. While the demonic blade was shooting over, in the distant void about 20 million miles away from where Tuoba Linfeng was, a huge fortress with a diameter of 10,000 meters was sailing in the starry sky. This starry sky fortress belonged to an exploration team. In the universe, the most daring people besides interstellar pirates were interstellar explorers. In the face of treasures and treasures in the starry sky, almost all interstellar explorers were crazy, like hungry wolves with bloodshot eyes. Once they encountered something, they would not easily let it go. Even if it was at risk of their lives, they would fight for it with all their might. The demonic blade shooting over had already attracted the attention of this interstellar exploration team. From within this 10,000-meter large fortress, there was a large amount of exclamations and cheers in an instant. Searching for treasures in the boundless starry sky, sometimes they would not have any harvest even after many years. In fact, even if they had any harvest, they would definitely not encounter a supreme treasure of this level. But today, a great treasure fell from the sky and actually found its way to them. Looking at the situation, this black demonic blade should have just been born in some region, and now it was still without an owner, shooting aimlessly in the void. The powerhouses of the interstellar exploration team were indescribably excited. They felt that they were too lucky. An unprecedented great creation fell from the sky like a pie. In the midst of the noisy cheers, the 10,000-meter large fortress changed its course at the first moment, slanting diagonally, wanting to intercept the path of this newly born supreme treasure blade, trapping it in the void, and then find a way to collect it. Of course, although they were inexplicably excited, they did not forget the necessary caution. The 10,000-meter fortress immediately activated the energy shield, and the entire surface of the huge ship was surrounded by a circle of yellowish-brown energy. Boom! After 2 breaths of time, the unmatched precious blade shot over. The 10,000-meter fortress trembled slightly. The ship cannons opened fire, shooting out an energy net cannon. This kind of energy net cannon was a patent for specially modified ship cannons. Normally, very few ordinary warships would be equipped with it. Its purpose and effect was to shoot out energy beams from the ship cannons and form a net of energy light to capture ferocious beasts and other prey in the void of space. And now, for the Galactic Exploration Team, their prey was none other than the black demonic blade that was shooting toward them at extreme speed. The distance between the two parties was close to begin with, and the speed of the demonic blade was extremely fast. Therefore, as soon as the energy net shot out, it collided head-on with the demonic blade. Slash! An incomparably clear sound of tearing silk rang out. The energy net of the 10,000-meter fortress did not even last half an instant and was instantly cut open. However, the demonic blade's rapid speed was not obstructed in the slightest. Its speed was still the same as before, and it slashed toward the 10,000-meter fortress. Run! It's too sharp. What kind of murderous weapon is this? It's over. I was careless. Rumble! Seeing this scene, the galactic explorers in the 10,000-meter fortress cried out in shock and wanted to escape. However, before they could finish their words, a huge explosion resounded through the void and continued to wreak havoc. This time, the heavenly demon blade that was shooting over at an extremely fast speed finally stopped. It did not continue forward, but it was not stopped by the 10,000-meter tall fortress. Instead, it stopped on its own accord. The 10,000-meter fortress had long been cut in half, but it did not explode. What was strange was that not a single starry sky expert had escaped from the 10,000-meter fortress that had been cut in half. Logically speaking, since the battleship had not exploded, even if the 10,000-meter fortress had been cut open, there should have been a large number of survivors. But in fact, this was not the case. Soon, the entire 10,000-meter fortress that had been cut in half gradually withered as if it had been decayed by time. Even the energy inside it and the starry sky experts were the same. Screech! A black light rushed out of the 10,000-meter fortress and let out a scream of joy. It was the demonic blade. After absorbing the metal essence of an entire 10,000-meter fortress and the flesh and blood essence of a large number of starry sky experts, the damage of the demonic blade had obviously been slightly repaired. However, the blade was still full of ferocious cracks. Obviously, it would take a long time for it to fully recover. Walala! With a sharp screech, the 10,000-meter fortress that had been cut in half completely disintegrated. It was not disintegrating in large chunks, but like a sand sculpture, it collapsed into dust and was blown away by the cosmic hurricane. The demonic blade was indeed worthy of being the supreme treasure of the extraterritorial demon world. A 10,000-meter fortress, along with all the energy inside and the flesh and blood of the starry sky experts, was completely absorbed by it. What was left was only complete dregs that were blown away by the wind and turned into ashes. This scene happened to be seen by the zombie emperor Tuo Balinfeng, who had just arrived and was now floating in the void not far away. It made his eyes burst with light and he was pleasantly surprised. Not only can it absorb the metal essence, but it can also absorb pure energy, and it can also absorb the flesh and blood essence and vitality. Sure enough, it is worthy of being the supreme treasure of the extraterritorial demon world. It is just like the demonic body that can change between any form at will. There is no taboo. Ha ha ha! Raising his head and laughing, Tuo Balinfeng's eyes suddenly flashed with a sharp light. His figure flashed and he raised his hand to grab the black demonic blade. The demonic blade was originally 10,000 meters in size, but now it was extremely obedient. As Tuo Balinfeng raised his hand to grab it, the 1,000-meter-long blade shrunk by itself. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a ferocious demonic blade that was nearly 10 meters long and was held in Tuo Balinfeng's hand. Even though he had shrunk to a size close to 10 feet, he still exceeded the height of Tuo Balinfeng in his human form. Moreover, he was taller by a large margin. At this moment, his right hand was like holding a door. Although it was strange, it was incomparably domineering. Xiao! With a face full of ecstasy, Tuo Balinfeng held the demonic blade in his hand and slashed at the distant void. Rip! A clear sound of ripping silk was heard, and a 10,000-meter-long crack was easily cut open in the void. Chapter 3883. Aged Yellow Star. Gung Planet was originally a lifeless planet without any life forms. It did not even have an atmosphere. But now, there were at least 1 million human powerhouses on the planet, as well as a large number of intelligent robots, mining ships, and engineering equipment. This planet was not even named Aged Yellow Star before. It only got its name 100 years ago. 100 years ago, a top family of the Heavenly Wind Empire under the rule of the immortal empire of the human race discovered a type of metal on this planet, aged yellow iron. Then, together with the Heavenly Wind Empire, they began to excavate the minerals of this star, and 100 years passed. Today, the aged yellow iron resources on this aged yellow star were basically all mined, leaving only some poor ores, but they were still mining. After all, although the aged yellow iron was not a particularly precious metal, it was rarely found in the countless mineral stars in the universe. And to make the alloy of the battleship, it was a metal element that must be added. So, as long as there was a little bit of aged yellow iron left, the mining would not stop. However, the main force of the mining army had already evacuated, and now, there were only a large number of mining ships, engineering equipment, and intelligent mining robots left on the aged yellow star. There were only about 100,000 strong human warriors left. A somewhat dilapidated interstellar fortress appeared in the distant void of the aged yellow star, and it was quickly approaching. This was a mineral star, and it had already reached the late stage of mining, so it could be said that there was not much value in it. So normally, no one would come here, even the space pirates were too lazy to pay attention to it. Because of this, the sudden arrival of this interstellar fortress immediately attracted the attention of the human warriors stationed on the mineral star. Of course, part of the reason was because this interstellar fortress looked very strange, not only because of its dilapidated appearance, but also because of the size of the ship. Ordinary interstellar fortresses were either 50,000 meters in diameter or 100,000 meters in diameter. Big interstellar fortress. This kind of interstellar fortress that was neither big nor small, with a diameter of 70,000 meters, was really rare, and looked neither fish nor fowl. This strange interstellar fortress was Tuoba Linfeng's ride, the zombie fortress. At this time, in the command cabin on the top floor of the zombie fortress, as the emperor of this zombie army, Tuoba Linfeng slowly stood up. For the sake of this emperor's supreme weapon, the hunt begins. With a faint smile, he gently raised the wine cup in his hand and drained it in one gulp. His eyes burst out with a blazing bloody light. Rumble! In the next moment, just as the starry sky fortress landed on the surface of the Gunhuang star, a huge thunderous explosion resounded. The entire 70,000-meter diameter starry sky fortress exploded without any warning, shocking everyone on the Or star. But what truly shocked them was yet to come. Surprisingly, there was no fire in the strange fortress that had exploded. Instead, it disintegrated in the void and turned into 5 large fortresses with a diameter of more than 10,000 meters. It looked extremely ferocious, not like a starry sky battleship at all. It gave people the feeling that it was a mixture of flesh and metal. Waving its sharp blades and opening its bloody mouth, it immediately rushed towards the several mining areas in front of it. Moreover, as Xianxia's small fortress exploded, 5 ferocious monsters of flesh and metal appeared. At the same time, nearly 1,000 figures fell out of Xianxia's small fortress and appeared in the void. Although they were all human cultivators, they began to transform as soon as they appeared. Roar! A young human beauty with an extremely enchanting figure raised her head and roared. Her body instantly expanded and turned into a ferocious monster with a height of 10,000 meters. Her body was covered with tentacles, and some mucus was secreting from the small holes all over her body. Moreover, among the countless tentacles of this meat mountain, there were clearly invisible ripples spreading out. In an instant, it shrouded this void and more than 10 Xianxia's large and small fortresses. These invisible ripples were a unique biological frequency. Its function was to temporarily interrupt the communication in this corner of the void, so that the signal on the star network could no longer be transmitted. Immediately afterward, an extremely pleasant human female voice sounded from this disgusting meat mountain. "Boss, the control is successful. The aged yellow star has been isolated, and the signal on the star network can no longer be transmitted. We can start now." Roar! Screech! Just as he finished speaking, the nearly 1,000 figures in the surrounding space had already moved together. Shocking roars and ruthless howls rang out one after another as the nearly 1,000 figures all began to transform. Just like those powerhouses in the Second Universe's Federation, they activated their bloodline and revealed their bloodline true body. After they transformed, the huge figures that appeared were not only strange, but they all exuded a strong evil aura. Some of them were even full of rotten flesh and blood, constantly squirming as if they wanted to devour everything. There was even a rotten bone dragon that was hundreds of meters in size. A large amount of flesh and blood remained on the huge dragon's body, but it was all rotten and exuded a disgusting aura. It was incomparably evil. All of this was too shocking. All the miners and powerhouses on the aged yellow star were already trembling with fear. At this time, they finally understood what was going on. In horror and despair, a series of exclamations sounded in an instant. Zombies! Universe zombies! Screech! An earth-shattering roar sounded. Zombie Emperor Tuoba Linfeng waved his hand and summoned a ferocious murderous weapon full of gaps. It was the Heavenly Demon Blade. Under the wind, the Heavenly Demon Blade instantly turned into a supreme murderous weapon. Amidst the cheers, it slashed toward a huge mining fortress in front of it. Tuoba Linfeng was accompanied by two enchanting beauties on his left and right sides. His figure stood in the void with his left hand behind his back. With a flip of his right hand, a cup of red wine appeared in his hand. He took a sip and murmured with a faint smile, "Go, this Emperor's supreme battle weapon, this is your first meal. The feast begins." The Second Universe, the ancestral land of the Dark Turtle Clan, one of the top 10 clans, the Dark Turtle Starfield. Since the last time the Netherworld Young Master stirred up trouble in the Dark Turtle Starfield, this vast starfield, which had a strong sense of twilight, had completely returned to tranquility. Although the Dark Turtle Clan was one of the top 10 clans in the Second Universe, its patriarch had been in hibernation for many years. Few of its clansmen showed up in the outside world. However, the Dark Turtle Clan was extremely powerful. Therefore, in this Dark Turtle Starfield, except for a few explorers and treasure hunters who occasionally came, there were basically no large fleets coming. Especially in the depths of the Dark Turtle Starfield, this was a forbidden area. Outside powerhouses were not allowed to come close. Chapter 3884. This giant tortoise that tore through the void and descended was none other than the Void Giant Tortoise. It was rescued by Xianxia and the Headless Infant Corpse, and then sent to the Nether Turtle Starfield by the Headless Infant Corpse. Moreover, after he left, he used some kind of mysterious hand to smooth out the void and erase all traces, ensuring that the Heavenly Dao's green eye couldn't track him down. It could be said that the Void Giant Tortoise was now absolutely safe. Rumble. The moment the Void Giant Tortoise's figure descended, the entrance to the Nether Turtle secret realm in the deepest part of the Nether Turtle Starfield opened. With a low rumble, several giant Nether Turtles rushed out of the void and bowed in the void, welcoming the heavily injured Void Giant Tortoise into the Nether Turtle secret realm. Then, the entrance to the secret realm was completely sealed. After a few breaths, an old voice resounded throughout the entire Nether Turtle Starfield, entering the ears of a large number of explorers and treasure hunters scattered throughout this vast starfield. This was clearly an order issued by an immortal-level Nether Turtle, and the endless majesty it exuded caused all the powerhouses in the starry sky to tremble. Within 10 days, all non-members of our race are to evacuate. The Nether Turtle Starfield will be completely sealed from now on. Those who stay will be beheaded. In the first universe, at the black hole of life not far from the demon starfield. Whoosh! The sound of air breaking rang out, and Yi Xian's figure appeared. This interstellar coordinate jump was finally a success. The reason why the target of this interstellar coordinate jump was targeted at the black hole of life was partly because Yi Xian had not finished his business in the first universe. Also, the black hole of life was located in the first universe, just like the source of all evil starfield. The ancient void where Yi Xian activated the interstellar coordinate jump ability was not in the 3 universes. Yi Xian was not sure if it was adjacent to the second and third universes. When the Netherworld furnace tore through the void and entered that ancient void, it went from the source of all evil starfield in the first universe. If there were no accidents, that ancient void should at least be adjacent to the source of all evil starfield in the first universe. Therefore, the interstellar coordinate jump ability this time was a success. Only then would the probability be maximized. Fortunately, nothing unexpected happened. Otherwise, it would be a headache to find the void path to return to the 3 universes in the chaotic void turbulence. How many fleets that left the 3 universes to explore the unknown void of the universe left forever and never returned? It was like being exiled forever. Letting out a light breath, Yi Xian turned his head to look around. After confirming that the interstellar coordinate jump this time had been a success and that he was currently in the familiar black hole of life, his heart, which had been hanging in his throat, finally completely returned to his chest. Yi Xian was the nether turtle starfield of the headless infant corpse once again. Of course. Of Yi. Not. It was very important. Although Yi Xian didn't know where the void tortoise was sent to by the headless infant corpse because it was the headless infant corpse that tore open the void fissure, the headless infant corpse must know. It must be an absolutely safe place for the void tortoise to recover from its injuries in peace. When it was born, a supreme primordial lord at his peak would be Yi Xian's greatest support, apart from the headless infant corpse. The only thing he felt was a pity was that he didn't have time to send some all-evil origin liquid to the void tortoise. Yi Xian still had a little over 2,000 drops. If the void tortoise needed it, he could give it all to it. However, he was in too much of a hurry. He didn't have the chance. Although he had a great harvest this time, the headless infant corpse must have used up a lot of energy after so many attacks. First, he sent out a wisp of weak violet-black light that was like the glow of a firefly, and it entered the void tortoise's body. Even though it seemed inconspicuous, that wisp of violet-black light was definitely extraordinary. How could it be ordinary since it was able to instantly revive the void tortoise that was on the verge of death? After that, besides sending the void tortoise away and executing a great ability to flatten space and erase all traces, the headless infant corpse had shot out a wisp of the same violet-black light towards the black tribulation cloud in the distance before it was taken away by Yi Xian. If nothing unexpected happened, the azure eye of the heaven Dao would have been caught off guard as soon as it descended, and it would have been injured by this wisp of violet-black light. Unfortunately, Yi Xian had already left at that time, so he was unable to witness this scene at all. On the other hand, the headless infant corpse that was in the process of recovering had definitely exhausted a lot of energy from these attacks. Unfortunately, even though he knew that Yi Xian possessed a large amount of all-evil origin liquid, he didn't ask for it at all. This made Yi Xian feel really helpless. He wanted to help, yet he was unable to do so. Perhaps this all-evil origin liquid isn't of any use to the headless infant corpse at all. Yi Xian thought of the azure eye of the heaven Dao. He was also in the process of recovery, and he was the one who had set up the netherworld furnace refinement formation. If the all-evil origin liquid produced by the netherworld furnace was useful to existences at the level of the azure eye of the heaven Dao and the headless infant corpse, then why wouldn't the azure eye of the heaven Dao use it himself? Yi Xian immediately shook his head and laughed bitterly when he thought up to this point. A top-notch bigwig is a top-notch bigwig after all. This is a top-notch resource that even the almighty figures of the primordial era and the primordial exalts only get a few drops or even a drop every year, yet he actually doesn't take a fancy to it. Sigh, comparisons are odious. Because of this, Yi Xian thought of the netherworld furnace once more. If nothing unexpected happened, then the netherworld furnace should have returned to the origin of all evil by now. Perhaps the refinement after this hunt had already begun. However, it would obviously take some time for the final product of the refinement to be produced. Yi Xian wasn't in a hurry to go over immediately. On one hand, he was worried about the azure eye of the heaven Dao. On the other hand, he could arrive instantly after activating the interstellar coordinate jump ability, so he didn't have to worry about missing anything at all. As for what he had to do now, Yi Xian pondered for a moment before his heart began to burn with excitement. He wasn't in a hurry to deal with the remains of the 500 or so powerful primordial beings he had obtained from the netherworld furnace this time. What truly made his heart beat faster was the continuation of the ancient Dongshu technique. Now that he had obtained the complete version of the ancient Dongshu technique, this was the supreme inheritance of the void tortoise lineage, and it was of great significance to Yi Xian. Come to think of it, his cultivation had been stagnant for a very long time. His physical body and blood cultivation was now at the cosmic realm level 5, but his cultivation of the ancient Dongshu technique was still stuck at the 8th level, the black hole realm level 9 great perfection. Chapter 3885. Currently, there were a total of 9 items hovering above Yi Xian's sea of consciousness. In the center were the Rai Di seal and the Farmer God Cauldron. One of them was a naturally born treasure, while the other was a primordial treasure. Furthermore, they were both heavy artifacts. As for the Rai Di seal and the Farmer God Cauldron, there were 7 small items. The Spirit Source Core, the Void Essence Crystal, the Fallen Sky Bow, the Black Gold Dragon Scale, the Netherworld Claw, the Primordial Little Demon Ape, and the Ancient Tortoise Shell that he had just entered. They each represented one of Yi Xian's abilities or bloodlines, and they were all his strongest trump cards. However, the one that Yi Xian's consciousness was approaching was the ancient tortoiseshell that had just entered the group. This tortoiseshell represented the supreme bloodline inheritance of the void giant tortoise. It was also the strongest cultivation technique that belonged to this race, the ancient cave void technique. At this moment, as Yi Xian's consciousness came into contact with this ancient tortoiseshell and activated it, his mind trembled as he instantly entered an image of the inheritance imprinted on the tortoiseshell. This image was of an ancient primordial void that exuded endless vicissitudes of life. Roar! An earth-shattering roar came from the depths of the endless void, attracting Yi Xian's consciousness over. The image changed. A huge claw that was as vast as the sky stretched out from the endless darkness. With a casual swipe, the void instantly collapsed and an entire star field collapsed. Then a round flat head stretched out from the endless darkness. Boundless chaotic mist lingered around its eyes, making it impossible to see the light in its eyes. This was a giant tortoise. Just one shell pattern on its body was as large as a star system. As it crawled out from the darkness, the aura it emitted enveloped the entire universe, causing this part of the void to tremble as if it couldn't withstand it and was about to collapse. Then, Yi Xian quickly received the inheritance information of the ancient cave void technique in his mind. In the picture, an ancient giant turtle that was even larger than the stars was roaming in the galaxy with its physical body. It raised its head and roared, and a black energy rushed out from its mouth. Like a small meteor, it rushed into the endless horizon. At first, it was a small star core. Then it grew into a shooting star. Slowly it grew into a satellite, a planet, and then a star. In the end, it grew into a nebula and a vast galaxy. Then, it suddenly exploded and shrank to the extreme, turning into a black hole in the vast starry sky. Devour all things. This whole process was the first 8 realms of the starry sky level cultivation. There was no more after that, because the tortoiseshell was only damaged, the inheritance was broken. These were all present in the damaged tortoiseshell that Yi Xian had obtained previously, and only these were present. But now, the simple tortoiseshell condensed from the complete inheritance in his mind clearly contained more information than the previous 8 great realms. After the black hole realm came the origin point, followed by the grotto heaven realm, mystic light realm, void space realm, genesis realm, cosmic light realm. At this time, a corresponding change occurred in the inheritance picture. The huge black hole that represented the 8th great realm of the starry sky level quickly condensed. When it reached its limit, it turned into a faint dot. This was the profound meaning of the origin realm. During the process of the black hole condensing into a dot, a large number of obscure runes were released from Yi Xian's mind like compressed packets being released. Come, he instantly understood. Then, the tiny dot formed by the extreme condensing of the black hole expanded again, evolving into a small paradise. It emitted a mysterious light, giving birth to a void, giving birth to the initial embryonic form of a star domain, and finally becoming a vast universe with stars and voids, forming a complete universe. This whole process was the path that the ancient cave void technique had to take to reach the first 15 great realms of the starry sky level. The picture demonstration was only a representation of the image. Most importantly, during the demonstration process, it continuously released the obscure mysteries of the technique that appeared in Yi Xian's mind. Righteousness. Although Yi Xian had already obtained the complete inheritance of the ancient cave void technique, and if he continued to cultivate, he could even grow to become a supreme existence like the giant void tortoise. But now, the realm of his physical body and vital energy was only at the cosmic light level. He was advancing towards the last great realm of the first 15 great realms of the starry sky level, which was the universe level. Therefore, what the simple tortoiseshell demonstrated now was only the complete profound meaning of the first 15 great realms. The subsequent demonstrations of the profound meanings of the Star Lord level, Domain Lord level, Sector Lord level, Universe level, and Immortal level would only appear when his cultivation base reached a certain level. Yi Xian was not in a hurry. He immediately withdrew from the inheritance picture, adjusted his state of mind, and began to cultivate from the 8th great realm, the 9th great perfection of the black hole level. The next moment, in the sea of cultivation under the ancient tortoiseshell that was suspended above his sea of consciousness, endless waves of sea of consciousness suddenly surged up like a tsunami. The entire vast sea of consciousness came to life, completely churning. In the center, an incomparably huge giant void tortoise slowly emerged from the depths of the sea of consciousness. Every tortoise shell on the tortoise's back was branded with countless mysterious runes. This giant void tortoise represented the ancient cave void technique that Yi Xian cultivated. Because this ancient technique was the highest bloodline inheritance of the ancient cave void tortoise clan, Yi Xian obtained the complete technique at this moment and began to cultivate it. In the vast sea of consciousness, in his sea of consciousness, the phantom of this supreme giant tortoise appeared. Yi Xian's fleshly body and vital energy had already reached the 5th level of the cosmic realm. Now that he had obtained a complete set of the ancient Dongshu technique and fully understood the mysteries of the first 15 great realms, his cultivation speed was naturally incomparably fast. It was as if he was recovering, as if he was pouring water into a pool that had been built long ago. Along with the consumption of a large amount of cultivation resources, his cultivation level in the ancient cave void technique instantly soared like a rocket. The entire process lasted for about a day. When Yi Xian opened his eyes again, a familiar system notification instantly sounded in his mind. Ding! Congratulations, host! The ancient cave void technique has broken through. Current realm. Cosmic light level 6. Ding! Congratulations, host! The ancient cave void technique has broken through. Current realm. Cosmic light level 7. This was not the end, because along with the rapid improvement of his cultivation, it also caused the vital energy in his body to surge again. Thus, an almost identical system notification sounded in his mind again. Ding! Congratulations, host! The ancient cave void technique has broken through. Current realm. Cosmic light level 6. Ding! Congratulations, host! The ancient cave void technique has broken through. Current realm. Cosmic light level 7. Ancient cave void technique. Cosmic light level 7. Chapter 3886. At this moment, the cultivation of his cultivation and the power of his flesh and blood were finally synchronized, causing Yi Xian to feel an unprecedented feeling of his spirit and flesh finally reaching perfection. It was incomparably comfortable. After taking a long breath, Yi Xian stood up and roared, "True form of the demonic ape." His bloodline was activated in less than a second, and the true form of the demonic ape with 3 heads and 6 arms was revealed. His original body had soared from the cosmic level 7 to the cosmos realm. 8th cosmos realm. If Yi Xian were to use the first 3 transformations of the devil ape again while activating the true body of the devil ape, his true body would be 30,000 meters tall, and his cultivation would increase by 3 small levels. At that time, he would be at the 2nd level of the Star-Lord state. He was still in the beginning phase of the Star-Lord state, but it was completely different from the first level. After all, it would take a long time for the experts of the Star State to make a breakthrough, even if it was just a minor advancement. Yi Xian, on the other hand, had only been able to reach the 1st level of the Star-Lord state after using all his skills. However, he had already reached the 2nd level of the Star-Lord state in less than a month after using all his bloodline skills. Any Star-Lord would have been envious if they had heard of it. Yi Xian had already verified that every transformation of the 9 transformations of the demonic ape could instantly increase one's overall cultivation by a small level. There was no suspense at all. Therefore, he didn't perform the first 3 transformations of the demonic ape, because he had something else on his mind. It was the 500 corpses of the primordial creatures that he had stolen from the netherworld cauldron. His harvest was truly astonishing. He had obtained 13 corpses of lords of the primordial era, more than 200 corpses of the primordial creatures, and more than 200 corpses of the primordial creatures that were below the primordial era. In total, there were almost 500 corpses of the primordial creatures that were above the immortal level. It was definitely a shocking amount of resources. Although it didn't seem like much compared to the total number of corpses in the netherworld cauldron, Yi Xian would have had to rely on luck if he wanted to obtain one of the corpses of the primordial creatures that were above the immortal level. Very soon, Yi Xian cancelled the true form of the ancient demonic ape and reverted to his human form. He had chosen the appearance of Linghu Young Master. Hiu! With a wave of his hand, the farmer god cauldron was summoned from his body and suspended in front of him. Although it wasn't in its complete form like a giant star, it was still a colossal object with a diameter of 10,000 feet. The 500 corpses of the primordial creatures that he had stolen from the netherworld cauldron were all above the immortal level. Among them, there were even 13 corpses of the lords of the primordial. With Yi Xian's current strength, it was impossible for him to take them into his body directly. He could only rely on the farmer god cauldron and borrow its power. Now these precious corpses of the primordial creatures were all stored in sealed caves at the bottom of the volcano in the central region of the cauldron space inside the cauldron by Yi Xian. Just like the corpse of the primordial underworld ant first-generation descendant he had obtained from the Hell Ant tribe and the corpse of the primordial purple-gold void rat he had obtained from the space rat tribe, each corpse was stored separately in a sealed cave. After summoning the farmer god cauldron, Yi Xian didn't immediately take action. He seemed to have sunk into deep thought, pondering over something. According to his calculations, even if the netherworld cauldron returned to the origin of all evil right after him, it would immediately begin refining the thousands of corpses of the primordial creatures they had obtained from this hunt. Even if the netherworld cauldron itself had undergone an evolution and its power had increased compared to before, it would still take at least 3 days to complete the refinement of this cauldron of all evil origin fluid. It had only been a day since he had launched an interstellar coordinate jump and returned to the black hole of life. There were still 2 days left. Wasting time wasn't a solution. Moreover, he had just experienced a cultivation breakthrough, so it wasn't very suitable for him to waste time cultivating. Therefore, Yi Xian summoned the farmer god cauldron with a wave of his hand. His goal was to use the farmer god cauldron to refine the flesh medicine and waste these 2 days. Currently, Yi Xian's cultivation had reached Cosmic Light Level 7. With another 2 minor breakthroughs, he would reach Cosmic Light Level 9 perfection. At that time, he would need to use the final Level 15 fluid. Once he used up the Level 15 fluid, he would reach Cosmic Light Level 9 perfection. If he still couldn't refine the Level 16 fluid, then his cultivation in terms of flesh and blood would remain stagnant. Although he could continue cultivating the ancient Dongshu mantra to the end, he wouldn't have any problems with the lack of cultivation until he became a primordial sovereign like the giant void tortoise. However, now that his cultivation had finally synchronized with his physical body, Yi Xian didn't want to leave either one behind. It would be like walking on one leg. How could it compare to running on 2 legs? In short, the refinement of the level 16 fluid was imminent. It was also because of this that Yi Xian shifted his focus to this aspect whenever he had free time. However, such concentration did indeed give him a lot of benefits. During this period of time, Yi Xian had used the computing power of the devouring system in his body to frequently deduce. Now, he had some understanding of how to use the power of the Shenong cauldron to refine the flesh and blood medicine with the 4 colored flames. In these 2 days, he planned to go from the theoretical level to the practical level. He would choose 1 or 2 corpses from the large number of primordial creatures' corpses he obtained from the netherworld cauldron to refine his hand. In any case, he had plenty of such corpses now. It wouldn't be a pity even if he wasted them. As long as he could improve every time he failed, it would be fine, even if the improvement was minimal. There are only 13 corpses of primordial sovereigns. They are too precious. Even if I want to try, I'll have to wait until later. However, if the raw material is too poor, I'm afraid the effect won't be very clear. So, I'll try using a primordial mighty figure's corpses. After pondering for a while, Yi Xian made up his mind. In an instant, a primordial mighty figure's corpses were taken out from the isolated cave at the bottom of the volcano in the central region. They appeared in the belly of the farmer god cauldron. It was the primordial silver dragon. Screech. Chapter 3887. Protecting the calf? What kind of situation was this? Yi Xian was stunned on the spot. His mind was a little confused. After a few moments of daze, he vaguely understood what was going on. If he guessed correctly, this silver dragon that he was going to use to refine the 4-color Shenong flame into a great medicine should be a creature from the primordial era that belonged to the headless infant corpse. Although the silver dragon had already fallen, in the eyes of the headless infant corpse, even if it was just a precious body, it would not be treated this way. Although this was a little unreasonable, it was not difficult to understand. Yi Xian also agreed with this. Since the silver dragon was not going to work, then he would just change to another precious body. It was impossible that the 500 or so primordial era corpses in his hands were all from the headless infant corpse's camp in that great battle of the primordial era, right? Depressed, Yi Xian put the silver dragon's corpse back and took out a black armored unicorn. It was also the corpse of a powerful being from the primordial era, and tried to draw a wisp of Shenong's 4 colors flame closer. This time, although the headless infant corpse did not let out a fierce roar, Yi Xian's chest still burned with a warning. Fine, it still did not work. This black armored unicorn was probably from his camp back then. His luck was too good. He randomly picked 2 corpses and it was 2 consecutive hits. Depressed, Yi Xian could only send the black armored unicorn back and take out another corpse of a powerful being from the primordial era. In the end, it still did not work. I'll endure. At this time, Xian was already quite impatient, but he did not flare up. Instead, he continued to test it repeatedly. After 13 consecutive times with the same result, Xian finally went berserk. He jumped on the spot and roared thunderously, "You did it on purpose! You definitely did it on purpose! This young master does not believe that his luck will be so good today. 13 consecutive hits? Can you not be so obvious when you are trying to trick me?" After being warned 13 times in a row, Xian was now sure that he had been tricked by the headless infant corpse. The anger in his heart grew stronger and stronger. His words were also somewhat impolite. Even if this young master's luck is really too good, winning all the bets, and these 13 corpses were indeed warriors of our camp back then, so what? Now that this young master is being dragged into this mess by you, I have to grow up as soon as possible, right? These guys have been dead for countless years. Their corpses are also a kind of resource. Why can't we use them ourselves? It is best not to be so of them. With that said, Xian planned to take advantage of the anger in his heart to cook the rice first. This kind of thing might be a knot in the headless infant corpse's heart, just like the little girl's thing. She would be hesitant about it for the first time, but after the first time, she would not care about it anymore. With that in mind, Xian did not even bother with the primordial era experts this time. He directly pulled out one of the 13 primordial era corpses and appeared in the center of the volcano in the central region of the space inside the cauldron. He was ready to draw out a wisp of Shenlong's 4-colored flames to start the refinement of the flesh and blood medicine. Screech! At this moment, Xian's left chest suddenly became hot again, and there was also a sudden screech that was not very loud, but still carried a strong sense of warning and protectiveness. F***CK. You are still in the mood, aren't you? This young master doesn't believe that today's matter is not negotiable. If you have the ability, then do it with this young master. Xian was furious. After being repeatedly warned by the headless infant corpse, he was really angry. This time, he was determined to consume the primordial era corpses that he had just pulled out, even if it meant falling out with the headless infant corpse. It would be best if he could force the headless infant corpse to leave. In this way, he would remove a knot in his heart. At least, he would not have to worry about being dragged into the final battle between him and the Eye of Heaven in the future. As if sensing Xian's determination, the headless infant corpse, after letting out a screech, immediately fell into silence. Even the burning sensation that came from the left side of Xian's chest disappeared. Just when Xian thought that the headless infant corpse had made a concession due to his tough attitude, there was a sudden buzzing sound in his mind at this moment. At this moment, Xian really felt a little panicked. He thought that the headless infant corpse was going to attack him in anger, but he soon realized that he had misunderstood. The buzzing sound in his mind was because a piece of information had been transmitted to him. This was obviously the headless infant corpse's doing. It was using this method to communicate with Xian, and roughly explain the reason why it had stopped Xian from using the primordial era corpses. This piece of information had images and some obscure runes that Xian didn't recognize. However, the strange thing was that as soon as his divine sense came into contact with these runes, he immediately understood the meaning of each rune. These runes were obviously a higher level of expression. Xian had never even heard of their existence before. Through this information and images, Xian finally understood why the headless infant corpse had stopped him. The images contained in the information were all related to the Tower of Ancients' inheritance. Xian recognized them at a glance. After all, he had already refined this tower. It was just that now it had been transferred to the treasured body of devouring. The headless infant corpse had stopped Xian from using the corpses of the primordial era mighty figures and primordial era supreme figures because through the Tower of Ancients' inheritance, there was a possibility that the primordial era supreme figures and above could live a second life. Of course, this was only limited to the primordial era supreme figures and primordial era supreme figures. Even the quasi-primordial era supreme figures did not have this opportunity, not to mention the universe level and immortal level creatures of the primordial era. The reason was very simple. If the Farmer God Cauldron and the Netherworld Cauldron were both top-notch treasures even during the Untainted Era, then the Tower of Desolation was even more awesome. The Netherworld Stove was personally refined by the Green Eye of the Heavenly Way, while the Shinnom Cauldron was refined by a primordial era supreme figure on the headless infant corpse's side. But after all, they were both acquired objects. The Tower of Ancients' inheritance was a congenital treasure. Although they were both primordial era supreme treasures, The difference between acquired and congenital was like the difference between heaven and earth. There was no comparison at all. Back then, when the war was in full swing, the Tower of the Ancients appeared out of nowhere and hovered above the void battleground of the Battle of the Ancients. All the existences above the level of the Ancients who had not yet fallen could send a strand of their spiritual sense into the Tower of the Ancients, regardless of which side they belonged to. No one knew where the Tower of the Desolate Land's inheritance came from, but they instantly understood its meaning. After this strand of spiritual sense was handed over, it would be preserved by the Tower of the Desolate Land's inheritance. Even if they were to fall in this battle, with this strand of spiritual sense, they would be able to revive in the future and live a second life. Chapter 3888. In fact, in addition to the corpse ancestor Hanba and the corpse ancestor Ho Qing in the Yanluo, even in the Tower of Desolation, there was another powerful figure from the Desolation era who had indeed lived a second life. That was the venerable Void Ladle, who was now following the devouring avatar. It had even been able to reconstruct its true body due to some kind of opportunity. Unlike the demonic dragon phantom that was also following the devouring avatar, it had a real body. Although the current venerable Void Ladle was still very weak, at least it could not be compared to the first life of a powerful figure from the Desolation era when it was at its peak. Even after its second life, the evolution of its life form was not high enough, so many of its memories were sealed. However, as time passed, as the venerable Void Ladle's cultivation base and strength slowly increased, the degree of evolution became higher and higher. Everything that he had sealed in this source of spiritual sense of the past. Obviously, all the memories would be unsealed one after another. In the end, when the second life of the venerable Void Ladle had also grown to the level of a powerful figure from the Desolation era, all the sealed memories would return. As a result, it was no different from being reborn in its peak state. However, only a wisp of the source of spiritual sense was retained in the Tower of Desolation era. Like a seed, it had the possibility of living a second life. However, whether it could really make this second life a reality was still uncertain. For example, the demonic dragon phantom that was following the devouring avatar. Like the venerable Void Ladle, it was also a powerful figure from the Desolation era. It had left a wisp of its source of spiritual sense in the Tower of Desolation era. But now, due to a coincidence, the Void Ladle sovereign was able to reconstruct his true body with Yi Xian's blessing and truly live a second life. As long as he didn't die prematurely during this process, once he completely matured, it would be equivalent to being reborn. However, the demonic dragon phantom was different. Although his source of spiritual sense was also brought out of the Tower of Desolation era by Yi Xian, it was only an energy phantom. It did not have a physical body, so it could not be considered to have truly lived a second life. This was because the energy of this demonic dragon phantom would be consumed if it did not encounter an opportunity to reconstruct the true body of the demonic dragon. In the end, when the energy of the demonic dragon's shadow was completely depleted, the source of consciousness that he had left in the Tower of Desolate Antiquity and was later brought out by Yi Xian would also be destroyed. At that time, the primordial demonic dragon would have completely fallen. Even the seed it had left behind to live a second life would be destroyed. It could be said that the origin of spiritual sense left in the Tower of Ancients' inheritance by the masters of both camps who were at the level of the primordial great powers could only be regarded as a seed. However, whether this seed could sprout again, reconstruct its true form, and live a second life would depend on its own circumstances. Fate. It was not easy for an existence of this level to reconstruct their true body. This was related to their own bloodline attribute. For example, corpse ancestor Hanba and corpse ancestor Ho Qing. Although Yi Xian had a large number of top-grade resources in his hands, without the origin of corpse Dao, Hanba and Ho Qing would not be able to reconstruct their true forms. Hanba was the luckiest. A wisp of corpse Dao origin was originally sealed in the Yanluo. After she woke up first, she immediately used it to reconstruct her true form. After that, she was able to use top-grade resources such as the innate chilling spiritual liquid. Otherwise, without her true form, these top-grade resources would not be able to solve the problem. She would not be able to solve the problem. In fact, Ho Qing was also lucky. In the ancestral land of the Space Rat clan, she had also obtained a wisp of corpse Dao origin from the remains of the purple gold void rat. If this wisp of corpse Dao origin had not helped her reconstruct her true form, it would have been useless no matter how many top-grade resources Yi Xian had given her. This included Void Lord Ladle. If Yi Xian had not possessed a void marrow crystal, he would most likely have ended up like the demon dragon's phantom. Since Lord Ladle had yet to reconstruct his true form, he could not be considered to have truly lived a second life. From this, it could be seen that although the Tower of Desolation contained a large number of Desolation-era experts of both camps and above, it was still very difficult to make these seeds germinate and truly live a second life. It was still very, very difficult. However, the 13 Primordial Supremes and the 200 or so Primordial Supremes remains that Xianxia had obtained from the Netherworld Cauldron could perfectly solve this problem. The 13 Primordial Supremes and the 200 or so Primordial Supremes did not directly perish in the Great Battle back then. Basically, they had all fled into the Void Crack after being severely injured. After a period of healing and recovery, they could not hold on in the end and died due to the loss of their consciousness. Although their consciousness was gone, the remains of their true forms were still there. With these well-preserved remains, their rebirth and resurrection were much more convenient than the other Primordial Supremes who had perished in that battle. Although the headless infant corpse did not dare to guarantee the success rate, after all, even he and the Heavenly Eye were confused about the origins of the desolate ancient inheritance tower. They had no way of knowing. When the battle began back then, it was only because they saw this mysterious innate treasure tower that they did not side with either side. Moreover, it only took action to collect the Primordial Supremes and above Primordial Supreme's spiritual source and nothing else. Therefore, it did not interfere and allowed them to leave after completing their mission. However, according to the headless infant corpse's deduction, if these Primordial Sovereigns and Primordial Sovereigns were able to preserve their complete bodies, they would be able to fuse with their own spirit sense essence, which they had taken the initiative to separate and preserve in the ancient Tower of Inheritance back then. Then, there was at least a 50% chance that they could directly resurrect with their true forms and live a second life, without waiting for the opportunity to reconstruct their bloodline real bodies. This was originally their true forms, so it was the most suitable. If a wisp of Primordial Supreme's spiritual source entered, the compatibility would be perfect. Then, why would they need to reconstruct their bloodline real bodies? It was precisely for this reason that the headless infant corpse prevented Xianxia from taking action on these remains, even if they were from the opposing camp back then. After all, the first life was the first life, and the second life was like a new life. Even the existence of life was different. Even if they were from the opposing camp back then, it was not impossible to instigate them in this life. If it really did not work, then it could be erased at that time. Of course, this was only limited to the Primordial Supremes and above. As for the rest, it was not included in this list. This was because even if their remains were well preserved, there was not a wisp of Primordial Supreme spiritual source left in the Tower of Desolation. Naturally, there was no chance for them to live a second life. In other words, of the more than 500 Primordial Supremes remains that Xianxia had brought out from the Netherworld furnace this time, nearly half of them could not be taken lightly. The headless infant corpse would be left for the future. He would send them into the Tower of Desolation to see if he could use their own wisp of Primordial Supreme spiritual source left in the tower. Then, he would resurrect them and let them live a second life. As for the other half of the remains that were below the Primordial Supreme's level, Xianxia could do whatever he wanted. Chapter 3889. Xianxia fell into deep thought after he figured out the reason why the infant corpse had stopped him from taking the 13 Supreme Primordial Masters and the 200 Supreme Primordial Masters' remains. In any case, he could not touch the remains he had just obtained from the Dark Cauldron. At that time, there were a large number of powerful Primordial Masters' remains in the Dark Cauldron. Xianxia took advantage of the situation and kept the remains. Naturally, he chose the ones that were basically intact. Therefore, the 500 or so primordial creature corpses he had obtained were all in perfect condition. More than half of the Primordial Masters' remains were below the level of Supreme Primordial Masters. He could do whatever he wanted with them. After all, there was no possibility for them to live a second life. However, as for the 13 Supreme Primordial Masters and the 200 Supreme Primordial Masters' remains, when Xianxia met with his devouring doppelganger, he had to send them all into the Tower of Ancients' Inheritance. He wanted to see if he could use the origin of spiritual sense left in the Tower of Ancients' Inheritance to revive a few of the Primordial Masters. Even if the probability of success was low, as long as a few of the Supreme Primordial Masters and Supreme Primordial Masters could be revived and live a second life, the harvest would be very impressive. After all, it was not like the Void Ladle Master, who was revived by rebuilding his bloodline real body. Instead, it was directly revived with their original body. Presumably, if it was successful, even if their cultivation could not reach their peak, they would not be too weak. As for the issue of camp, Xianxia agreed with the headless infant corpse's statement. The battle of the primordial masters only represented the standpoint of their previous lives. But now that they had lived a second life, the existence of their lives had changed. What was so difficult about changing their standpoint? If he did encounter some stubborn existences, he could just kill them. With the headless corpse, it was not difficult to kill a primordial grand cultivator or supreme master of the ancients who had just been resurrected. It could be said that this was definitely a piece of good news. In an instant, it solved the problem of the future high-end battle force on Yi Xian's side. The Tower of Desolation was a terrifyingly powerful trump card. Through it, even the supreme beings of the Desolation Era and the supreme beings of the Desolation Era could be revived. There was even the possibility of a second life. Just thinking about it was unbelievable. But this was not what made Yi Xian the happiest. More importantly, through the information that the headless infant corpse revealed to him, Yi Xian also understood an even more important point. It was actually related to the netherworld furnace. Before this, Yi Xian had planned to head to the source of all evil star domain again in 2 days to obtain the all-evil origin liquid that the netherworld furnace had condensed from the remains of the primordial beings they had hunted this time. The headless infant corpse was currently parasitizing Yi Xian's body, so it was obviously able to sense his thoughts. Because of this, taking advantage of the opportunity to explain the matters related to the ancient desolate inheritance tower to him, the headless infant corpse also suggested to Yi Xian, telling him that he absolutely shouldn't enter the source of all evil this time. On the one hand, because of the previous precedent, whether it was the netherworld furnace or the Eye of the Heavenly Way, it was very likely that they were on guard. Even the sudden advance of the unplanned condensation this time could be a trap. With the headless infant corpse, although it could protect Yi Xian, it would definitely be exposed. It was fine if the headless infant corpse was exposed, but once Yi Xian was exposed, all kinds of revenge attacks would come one after another like a tide, causing him to completely collapse. With the Eye of the Heavenly Ways methods, it could easily find out all the forces related to Yi Xian. When the time came, they would all become targets for destruction, including the demon race and Triumph City. The price was too heavy. Just for the all-evil origin liquid condensed by the netherworld furnace this time, it was really not worth taking such a huge risk. Of course, the headless infant corpse didn't mean to leave the matter at that and allow the all-evil origin liquid condensed by the netherworld furnace this time to be transported by the runic chains to the high-level forces of the enemy camp that needed it, helping them recover from their injuries. In fact, the headless infant corpse didn't just give a warning. It even gave a suggestion. If they acted according to its suggestion, if they succeeded, the all-evil origin liquid condensed by the netherworld furnace would sooner or later belong to Yi Xian. The content of this suggestion was very simple, and it was finished in a single sentence. It was to find a way to prevent the all-evil origin liquid condensed by the netherworld furnace this time and in the future from being transported out through the runic chains. As long as they could do this, the all-evil origin liquid would remain in the netherworld furnace. One day, it would all belong to Yi Xian. That was because the headless corpse of the infant child had already plotted against the netherworld furnace in the dark. Previously, when Yi Xian appeared in the source of all evil as the primordial little demon ape, in order to obtain the approval and protection of the nether furnace, Yi Xian had handed over a drop of soul blood to the primordial turtle so that he could help fuse it into the nether furnace. This drop of soul blood had been tampered with by the headless infant corpse. The headless infant corpse had added something inside, but it hadn't been activated yet because the time wasn't right. Once it was activated, the headless infant corpse had an 80% chance of seizing control of the netherworld furnace from the heavenly Tao's green eye. At that time, Yi Xian only needed to refine the netherworld furnace like the farmer god cauldron. At that time, the heavenly Tao's green eye wouldn't be able to do anything no matter how unwilling he was. Unless he killed Yi Xian, he wouldn't be able to take back the netherworld furnace. Since the netherworld furnace had been refined, the all-evil origin liquid that was stored inside the netherworld furnace that hadn't been transported out through the runic chains would naturally belong to Yi Xian. He could do whatever he wanted with it. Too despicable. Too shameless. After understanding all of this, Yi Xian was so agitated that he almost jumped up on the spot. Right now, he was extremely suspicious that his way of doing things had gradually become a little unorthodox, where he would rob and extort for no reason. This was most likely because the headless infant corpse had turned into a corpse lamp tattoo and followed him everywhere, thus affecting his own body. It was very obvious that this guy was too ruthless and too despicable. Compared to him, Yi Xian's previous robberies and extortions were simply child's play. Including his actions in the netherworld furnace this time, Yi Xian had only secretly stolen the corpses of several hundred primordial creatures from the netherworld furnace, taking drastic measures to deal with the situation. However, the headless infant corpse's move was no different from a desperate measure. If it really succeeded, it would definitely destroy the foundation of the heavenly Tao's green eyes' future rise again. A big shot was a big shot indeed. Either he didn't make a move, or when he did, it was simply earth-shattering. Even Yi Xian didn't dare to think of such a grand move, but he had already quietly made arrangements. Moreover, if no major accidents happened, this matter really could be successfully completed by him. Chapter 3890. After the unexpected evolution last time, the current netherworld furnace had already begun to develop an artifact spirit. From the fact that it could temporarily remove the rune chains on the furnace walls, it was likely that after returning to the depths of the source of all evil, it would also be able to remove the temporarily removed chains on its own accord. Once again, it would connect to the furnace walls. Therefore, it was definitely not easy to prevent the netherworld furnace from transporting the condensed all-evil origin liquid through those rune chains. Merely breaking those rune chains would probably not have any effect at all. Perhaps after exhausting all his effort and energy, the other party would be able to easily reconnect the chains. If that was really the case, Yi Xian would probably go crazy. The best method was to completely destroy those rune chains. Of course, they could only destroy half of the rune chains used to transport the product of the netherworld furnace, the all-evil origin liquid. As for the other half, the rune chains used to transport the raw materials of flesh and blood into the netherworld furnace that had been locked onto by the Eye of the Heavens Tao, and constructed a stable passageway had to be kept. Yi Xian only wanted to prevent the condensed all-evil origin liquid from being transported out, not prevent the raw materials of flesh and blood used to condense the all-evil origin liquid from being transported in. As long as the product of the netherworld furnace could not be transported out, all the all-evil origin liquid it had condensed would be stored inside the netherworld furnace. When the time was right, the headless infant corpse would activate the secret material he had added to Yi Xian's soul blood and snatch the netherworld furnace. After being refined by Yi Xian, it would be stored in the netherworld. All the all-evil origin liquid in the netherworld furnace would then fall into Yi Xian's pocket. Just the thought of it was enough to make one extremely excited. However, it was obviously impossible for Yi Xian to destroy all the rune chains that transported the all-evil origin liquid out by himself. He did not have the strength to do so. Even if he did, he would not be able to do it himself. The netherworld furnace had already returned to the source of all evil star domain. There was even a high possibility that a wisp of the Eye of the Heavens Tao's consciousness was lurking in the dark, spying on them. The moment Yi Xian appeared, it was tantamount to exposing himself, and he would be locked onto by the Eye of the Heavens Tao from then on. This matter could only be done by someone else. To put it bluntly, it was killing with a borrowed knife. Yi Xian frowned and pondered for a while. Soon, he had a general idea and grinned. Putting the matter of the netherworld furnace to the back of his mind for the time being, Yi Xian took out the flesh and blood of a creature of the desolation level from the cave at the bottom of the volcano in the central region of the Shenong cauldron. Furthermore, he directly guided a wisp of Shenong's four-colored flames over it, and began to refine it according to the method of refining the flesh medicine that he had deduced previously. Sure enough, the headless corpse didn't react this time. Even though they had seen the Wasteland Inheritance Tower fly across the void above the battlefield during the Battle of the Wastelands, they were not qualified or powerful enough to insert a strand of their spiritual sense into the tower. Therefore, in the eyes of the headless infant corpses, their remains were worthless. Of course, it was different for Yi Xian. It was also a top-grade flesh and blood resource. Now, he was using the Shenong's four-colored flames to refine the remains of a creature of the desolation level. This was only the first step. According to the result of Yi Xian's devouring system's deduction, if he wanted to use this method to refine the level 16 liquid, he would have to add all kinds of heavenly treasures, minerals, and other resources after the first step of refining. But that was the follow-up step. Yi Xian hadn't even mastered the first step of refining, so he naturally wouldn't waste resources. After all kinds of heavenly treasures that could be used to refine the level 16 liquid were extremely rare. Even Yi Xian didn't have many of them. As the Shenong four-colored flame burned, the feathers of this quasi-desolate era creature quickly fell off. Its flesh was roasted to a golden color, and its fat seeped out. It also emitted an exotic fragrance that penetrated one's heart. It was a 9-headed bird that was 90,000 meters long. However, after being roasted by the Shenong's four-colored flames, its body had been reduced to only 60,000 meters long. If it had only been roasted, he would have been able to feast on it. After all, it was the remains of a great being of the desolation level. Even though it had been dead for a long time, the remaining energy in its flesh and blood was still astonishing. Even Yi Xian, who often roasted such flesh and blood, had never eaten it before. He had never tasted such a delicacy. He had only ever roasted the remains of Star Lords and Sector Lords before, and he had only ever roasted the flesh of a quasi-primordial expert, which was the purple gold void rat he had obtained from the space rat's ancestral land. Yi Xian had once cut off a large chunk of the rat's flesh and roasted it. Now, as the nine-headed bird was completely roasted to a golden yellow by the Shenong four-colored flames, an alluring fragrance permeated through the cauldron and spread throughout his body. The saliva in Yi Xian's mouth couldn't help but stir as his mouth was filled with saliva. However, he managed to suppress the urge, because his purpose this time wasn't to roast the meat, but to refine the flesh and blood medicine. If one wanted to use this method to refine level 16 or even higher gene cultivation fluid, the first step was to refine the prepared blood and flesh to the point where it had completely turned into a blood and flesh pulp. Although the nine-headed bird's remains had been completely roasted, it was still far from being completely transformed into a blood and flesh pulp. He could eat it if he only wanted to wrap his stomach, but he had only just begun to refine the flesh and blood medicine. After forcefully suppressing the strong appetite in his heart, Yi Xian adjusted his state of mind. His originally restless state of mind quickly calmed down. He then took a deep breath and increased the input of the Shenong's four-colored flames. He also tried to control them in the slightest. This process was extremely crucial, and the slightest bit of carelessness would result in failure. Either the precious nine-headed bird's flesh would be directly burnt to a crisp, or the entire precious body would not be able to completely melt down the precious blood, precious flesh, and precious elixir. Time passed slowly. Yi Xian focused on controlling the Shenong's four-colored flames and refining the nine-headed bird's flesh and blood. Gradually, the body, which had been reduced to only 6,000 meters due to the power of the Shenong's four-colored flames, began to shrink again. 5,500 meters. 5,000 meters. During this process, the dense fragrance that was being emitted from the nine-headed bird's flesh and blood treasure that was becoming smaller and smaller became even more intense. Chapter 3891. The reason why Yi Xian was hiding in the heart of the central domain volcano was to guard against these native beasts who had long since turned into gluttons. Over this period of time, millions of native vicious beasts had been gathering at the edge of the central domain volcano, queuing up to roast meat. It was only in the last 2 days that the magnificent sight of millions of vicious beasts queuing up to roast meat at the edge of the central domain volcano had gradually disappeared due to the nearly depletion of their stock of meat. Although there were all sorts of spirit birds and spirit beasts in the mountains within the farmer god cauldron, on the one hand, they were raised by Yi Xian to be used for alchemy in the future. They weren't spoils of war stored in the hands of the native vicious beasts, so it wasn't easy to harm them. On the other hand, because these spirit birds and spirit beasts hadn't matured yet, the energy in their flesh wasn't dense. Even if they were roasted with a strange flame like the farmer god's four-colored flames, it would only satisfy their appetite at most. It wouldn't have much effect on the evolution of the body or life form. Therefore, these spirit birds and spirit beasts in the mountains within the farmer god cauldron had escaped this calamity. Although they had only been out of food for 2 short days, these 2 days felt like years to these gluttons who had long since become picky with their food. If it wasn't for the fact that they had no idea that Yi Xian still had large amounts of top-grade meat stored in the various sealed caves at the bottom of the central domain volcano, they had probably set their sights on that place for a long time. Moreover, it was very likely that the 2 ferocious beast emperors, the primordial porcupine and the primordial turtle, were leading the theft. Just like Shen Yuanziying and the other 2 girls who had wreaked havoc in the cauldron space back then. Of course, these sealed caves at the bottom of the central domain volcano had long been reinforced by Yi Xian, and had even used the power of the farmer god cauldron to set up layers upon layers of restrictions. Even if the 2 domain lords, the immemorial porcupine and the immemorial tortoise, were to take the lead, there was basically no chance of success. Once bitten, twice shy. Yi Xian had already been harmed by the 3 purplish warbler girls once, so he naturally wouldn't make the same mistake twice. However, he still underestimated this group of foodies. After 2 days of desolation, this group of people were already so hungry that their eyes were glowing. At this moment, although Yi Xian was hiding in the center of the central region's volcano and refining his hands, the 9-headed bird's flesh and blood was being roasted, and the fragrance that was being continuously refined spread out through the vast volcano's crater. The entire cauldron's vast space had long been filled with fragrance. Millions of people, When the foodie smelled it, he immediately became spirited. It was as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Without exception, they all swarmed over. Roar! It smells so good. This pig dares to bet that this time, what is being roasted is definitely the flesh and blood of a universe-level existence. Who did it? I'm very angry, and the consequences are very serious. That's right. That's right. The aroma seems to be coming from the bottom of the volcano. Pull it out. Pull out the guy who is eating the barbecued meat alone. God damn it. He picked up a piece of the universe-level flesh treasure and didn't give it to Master Pig and Master Tortoise. He's such a jerk. Awoo. Millions of indigenous ferocious beasts all rushed out from the surrounding mountains and gathered around the crater of the central region's volcano. They crouched down and peered into the depths of the volcano's crater. This scene was truly strange and inexplicable, causing Xianxia's entire body to tremble. He was originally concentrating on refining the corpse of the quasi-desolate ancient nine-headed bird that was floating in front of him. He was careful and had already refined it to a size of around 3,000 feet. Although it still hadn't reached the level of treasure blood, treasure flesh, and treasure pulp, at least 6,000 feet, had shrunk by half. The initial refinement was half complete. Unfortunately, all of this was in vain. As his originally focused mind was disturbed, Xian was slightly distracted. The Shenong four-colored flames, which were originally under close control, instantly became unstable. Although he instantly became alert, it was already too late. In less than half an instant, the nine-headed bird's flesh and blood that had shrunk to around 3,000 feet due to the refinement had shrunk to around 10,000 feet. In the blink of an eye, about 1/10 of the treasure body had been roasted black. It's burnt, hurry up and turn off the fire. Ayaya, it's already cooked. Why are you still in a daze? Hurry up and turn off the fire. Bring that big guy up. This turtle has been hungry for several days. Awa! It smells so good. If you don't come up, this pig will jump down. Before Xian could recover from his shock, the howls of the immemorial porcupine and the immemorial tortoise came from the northern edge of the central region's volcano. Seeing that Xian had roasted a large hunk of treasure meat that was about 3,000 feet long into charcoal, these two fellows were even more anxious than him. At this moment, they were jumping around at the northern edge of the central region's volcano. If it weren't for the large amount of Shenong four-colored flames floating in the belly of the volcano, and they were extremely dense, they would have already brazenly jumped down. They would have jumped down. In addition to the immemorial porcupine and the immemorial tortoise, there were also dozens of Star-Lord old monsters and more than 100 universe realm indigenous fierce beasts behind them. This group of fellows did not dare to clamor at Xian, but all of their eyes were shining with green light, and the corners of their mouths were dripping with saliva. They stared eagerly at the interior of the volcano below, and from time to time, there would be faint slurping sounds. F***CK. This young master is being targeted by a thief. Staring blankly at the nine-headed bird's flesh and blood treasure body that was suspended in front of him, because 1/10 of it had been roasted, Xian simply wanted to cry but had no tears. Fortunately, this was only his first time refining. To be able to successfully refine the 6,000-meter-long nine-headed bird's flesh and blood treasure body to a mere 3,000-meter-long size, completing half of the initial refinement process. This progress had already exceeded Xian's original expectations. Therefore, although this first refinement failed in the end, Xian was not too disappointed. At least, although the nine-headed bird's flesh and blood treasure body was precious, Xian still had more than 200 similar flesh and blood treasures of desolate era creatures of the immortal realm and above that he could refine. Only losing one was not a big deal at all. Moreover, although the nine-headed bird's flesh and blood treasure body was ruined, nearly 90% of it was still golden and shiny, and could be said to be fragrant. Eating it as a meal would not only satisfy the appetite of the mouth, but also promote the evolution of the body. It was not a waste at all. Thinking of this, Xian's mood improved again. With a thought, this 3,000-meter-long nine-headed bird's flesh and blood treasure body shot toward the mouth of the volcano above his head. He decided to continue refining. As for the ruined flesh and blood treasure body, he would just throw it out to the group of foodies and treat it as a reward for the whole army. Awoo! Faster, faster, faster. Chapter 3892. Ow! Hurry up! Hurry up! Hurry up! Roar! I can't hold it in any longer. It smells so good. It really smells so good. Seeing Yi Xian, who was at the bottom of the volcano, wave his hand and instantly throw over the pile of flesh and blood that emitted a rich fragrance and a shiny golden color. The large group of foodies, who were lying around the crater and looking down, immediately burst into an uproar. They seemed as if they'd gone mad as they howled incessantly. It was truly too noisy. Yi Xian frowned because if this continued, then he wouldn't be able to concentrate on refining at all. Right when he was about to reprimand them, the clamorous mouth of the volcano had suddenly become deathly silent. When he raised his head to look over, all the native ferocious beasts were nowhere to be seen. The area around the mouth of the volcano in the central region was too terrifying. A few million native ferocious beasts were lying at the edge of the volcano and sticking their heads out to look down, yet they hadn't covered the entire area. Yet now, not a single one could be seen. Along with the enormous 9-headed bird's flesh being carried away by the primeval porcupine and primeval turtle, the entire group of foodies actually swarmed over and left even faster than they'd arrived. In the blink of an eye, not a single beast could be seen. The 9-headed bird's flesh was still around 10 kilometers in size. Moreover, it was the corpse of an almighty figure from the quasi-primordial era, so its flesh and blood already contained formidable energy. After it was roasted by the 4-colored flames of Shenong and refined by Yi Xian, the energy contained within the flesh and blood had become even denser. The amount was even denser. Even the primeval porcupine and primeval turtle at the region Lord Realm couldn't open their bellies and eat to their heart's content like those treasured flesh and blood from before. So, even though it was only 10 kilometers in size, there were absolutely no small number of native ferocious beasts that could be eaten. Besides the primeval porcupine and primeval turtle, the few dozen Star-Lord Realm old monsters and over 100 Universe Realm native ferocious beasts should have a share. As for the other native ferocious beasts below the Universe Realm, even if they didn't have the fortune to eat the meat, they could still watch from the side and smell the fragrance. Perhaps when he licked the bones in the end, he would be able to hook out 1 or 2 pieces of precious flesh from the crevices of the bones. In short, as the 9-headed bird's oily fragrant flesh was taken away, all the millions of ferocious beasts that had swarmed over, without exception, all left. Yi Xian let out a long sigh of relief. Finally, it was quiet again, and he could continue to boil the precious body. It was time to practice. After adjusting his mood again, Yi Xian took out the second treasure body of a creature from the Desolation era from the cave at the bottom of the volcano in the central region. It was also at the level of a mighty figure from the quasi-Desolation era. This time, he had chosen a 1-horned howling sky tiger. Its entire body was as white as jade, and it glittered like a treasure. Although it had been dead for a long time, the energy in its body had not dissipated, and the golden tiger blood had not dried up. It could be clearly seen from the wound on its right hind limb. Huff! With a wave of his hand, the Shenong 4-colored flames that had just been withdrawn flared up again, and directly wrapped up the 1-horned howling sky tiger's body. A new round of roasting and refining began. The 1-horned howling sky tiger's fur was quickly refined, revealing its golden skin. Gradually, it was roasted to maturity, and its fat was dripping with a divine aura. It was full of energy. When the 1-horned howling sky tiger's body was completely cooked, it was only about 70,000 feet. Everything else was discarded as dregs. However, this was still only the beginning. Yi Xian took a deep breath, calmed himself down, and continued. According to the steps of refining the great flesh medicine, he carried out the initial condensation. The goal was to completely refine this 70,000 feet huge body. When he finally reached the level of treasure blood, treasure flesh, and treasure serum, he would be able to reach it. He estimated that there would only be a small amount of treasure serum in his hand. 60,000 feet. 50,000 feet. Until the final 2,000 feet. This time, Yi Xian had gone even further than when he was refining the 9-headed bird's flesh and blood. In the end, the single-horned howling sky tiger was only around 2,600 to 2,700 meters tall. But something unexpected happened at this moment. The Shenong 4-colored flames that had been carefully controlled shook slightly, and the originally delicate control was broken. The temperature suddenly soared, and the entire right hind limb that had shrunk by many times was roasted to a crisp. All his efforts were in vain. However, Yi Xian's self-confidence was even stronger. He had a strong feeling that the third refinement was bound to succeed. If the first and second refinements were only for practice, then after these 2 refinements, Yi Xian more or less grasped a few tricks. For the third time, He was confident that he could completely refine the treasure body of a quasi-desolate era to the level of treasure blood, treasure serum, and treasure serum. Whoosh! With a sound of breaking air, the one-horned howling sky tiger's treasure body that had been destroyed was directly thrown out of the volcano above by Yi Xian like a piece of trash. It was not that he was not greedy, but after all, this was the treasure blood and treasure flesh of a quasi-desolate era expert. The essence of the flesh was too rich. It had a strong nourishing effect on the physical body. However, Yi Xian didn't have the time to care about the Taotai feast right now. After refining his hands twice in a row, he had gained quite a bit of insight. Right now, it was the best time to finish refining the initial stage of flesh and blood in one go. Striking while the iron is hot meant this. A woo! A woo! As the flesh and blood of the single-horned howling sky tiger was thrown up, a little distance away from the mouth of the volcano in the central region above his head, the roar of the fierce beast sounded again, revealing madness and incomparable joy. Obviously, the group of foodies outside had found the one-horned howling sky tiger that had been thrown out. If the previous 9-headed bird was only enough for the hundreds of indigenous ferocious beasts of the universe level and above to eat, then, with the addition of the one-horned howling sky tiger's treasure body, the entire indigenous ferocious beasts race would be able to share a piece of the pie. Yi Xian didn't pay attention to all of this. After throwing out the horned howling sky tiger's flesh and blood treasure, he immediately took out a third set of flesh and blood treasure that was waiting to be refined. This time, it was a cyan and red bird that looked like a phoenix, so it should belong to the Yuan and Feng category. Yi Xian didn't pay attention to all of this. After throwing out the horned howling sky tiger's flesh and blood treasure, he immediately took out a third set of flesh and blood treasure that was waiting to be refined. This time, it was a cyan and red bird that looked like a phoenix. It should belong to the Yuan and Feng category. Yu Muzi's qi was very strong, but unfortunately, it had fallen in the end. Huff. Chapter 3893. This Yuan Phoenix's flesh and blood precious body wasn't that large. It didn't reach 100,000 zhong in size, only around 3,000 zhong in size. When all of the feathers fell off and the entire flesh and blood precious body was cooked, it was only 2,000 zhong in size. Yi Xian controlled the Shunnong four-colored flames to refine it. In just 10 minutes, the Yuan Feng's flesh and blood had shrunk by half again. It was only around 3,000 zhong in size. This meant that half of the deep refinement process was already completed. Yi Xian was not as excited as the previous 2 times. His mind was still as calm as an ancient well without ripples. The Shunnong four-colored flames were like the most precise scalpel in his hand. Inch by inch, the flames merged into the Yuan Feng's flesh and blood cells and began the refinement process. Time passed slowly. In the blink of an eye, 2 hours had passed. Previously, he only used 10 minutes to shrink the Yuan Feng's body to 3,000 zhong in size. Now, 2 hours had passed and the original 3,000 zhong had shrunk to 300 zhong in size. Although it seemed that the last 2 hours had only shrunk the Yuan Feng's body to 9,000 zhong in size, in reality, the refinement process was slowing down. As long as there were no mistakes, the refinement process this time should be successful. Yi Xian suppressed the joy in his heart and continued to refine the Yuan Feng's flesh and blood. The Shunnong four-colored flames that wrapped around the Yuan Feng's flesh and blood were always in a stable and fine state. They never wavered or changed. Half a day later, the Yuan Feng's flesh and blood had shrunk to 3 zhong in size. Under Yi Xian's continuous refinement, the Yuan Feng's flesh and blood had shrunk to 3 zhong in size. It was 1,000 times smaller. This was absolutely terrifying. It was unknown how much impurities and energy had been burned away by Yi Xian's Shunnong four-colored flames. The remaining mixture was the essence of the Yuan Feng's flesh and blood. It was the essence. However, this was not the end. The Yuan Phoenix, which was only about 3 feet in diameter, still maintained its original form. After all, it was a powerful existence at the quasi-desolation level. Even if it was roasted by the Shunnong four-colored flames, its body still shrank as a whole. The order in its body, the chains were still stable and did not collapse, causing the Yuan Feng's body to change shape and lose its majesty. As for Yi Xian's final goal, it was to completely refine it. The appearance of the Yuan Phoenix bird could no longer exist, and all of the precious blood and flesh could no longer exist. It had to be fused into one and turned into a slurry-like existence. That was the purest form of essence energy, the basic medicinal slurry of flesh and blood medicine. The refinement process continued. But Yi Xian. If in the end, the Luan phoenix still maintained its original appearance and its flesh couldn't be turned into medicinal paste, then this refinement was clearly a failure. Moreover, this kind of failure was not because there was a problem with Yi Xian's refinement process. If that was the case, the Luan Feng's body would not continue to shrink. However, its form did not change at all. The only reason why its flesh and blood could not be turned into medicinal paste was because it was used for refinement. The level of the flames was not high enough to melt the chains of order in the Luan Feng's flesh and blood. It could break them and fuse them together. If that was the case, then it would be a serious problem. No matter how hard Yi Xian tried, it would be useless. He could only wait until the Shenong exotic flames grew into a 5-colored flame and its power increased again. Only then would he be able to break this deadlock. However, the growth of the Shenong exotic flames was not fixed. Although it had grown 3 times, from the initial 1-colored flame to the current 4-colored flame, all in all, these 3 times could only be considered coincidences. There was no fixed pattern to be found. Who knew when it would be able to increase the level of the flames again and grow into a 5-colored flame? Thinking of this, Yi Xian could not help but feel anxious. However, he quickly regained his senses. No matter what, this Luan Feng's flesh and blood had shrunk to about 3 meters in size. He had to endure this refinement to the end. Even if he did not succeed, at least it would prove that the 4-colored flame was not powerful enough. Otherwise, if he made a mistake midway, even if it was just to verify this point, he was afraid that he would have to undergo another round of refinement. Yi Xian forcefully calmed his slightly impetuous state of mind and continued to refine it with rapt attention. Another half a day passed, and the Luan phoenix, which had shrunk to a diameter of around 3 meters, shrank once again. When it shrank to a diameter of only a meter, the pleasant surprise came. Walala! A series of faint crisp sounds came from the Shenong 4-colored flame that was suspended in front of Yi Xian. From the beginning to the end, the Luan Feng's body, which had maintained its original appearance, finally melted. From this moment on, its bird form could no longer be seen. These faint sounds, which were as dense as raindrops, were the sound of the chains of order in every inch of his body being completely torn apart. At this time, the Luan Feng's body had turned into a round ball that emitted a green-red light. The round ball that appeared in the form of a slurry had shrunk from a meter in diameter to a foot in size. It was as if the chains of order in its flesh and blood had completely collapsed. The moment its body disappeared, a miniature black hole appeared in this green-red slurry ball, as if it was completely collapsing. At this point, the refinement was finally completed. The Luan Feng's body that was 3,000 meters in size had been refined into a green-red slurry ball that was only a foot in diameter. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the energy contained in this orb of liquid was. And this was only the first step in refining the flesh and blood medicine. What Yi Xian had obtained was only a semi-finished product, and could not be considered a real flesh and blood medicine. The real flesh and blood medicine would use this flesh and blood medicine as the foundation, and then add in all sorts of rare heavenly materials and earthly treasures, and mix them again and again before finally obtaining them. This process still required Yi Xian to explore and deduce. After all, no one had ever concocted a level 16 liquid before, so Yi Xian still had a lot of effort to do. Swish! Swish! With a thought, this ball of flesh and blood medicinal paste that was about a foot in diameter and emitted a dazzling splendor was easily divided into 100 portions by Yi Xian's divine farmer's 4-colored flames. It floated in the air in front of him, causing him to be dazzled. After casually dispelling the Shenong 4-colored flame, Yi Xian took out 100 small storage boxes made of jade essence crystals from his undying world. Then, with a wave of his hand, these 100 egg-sized portions of green-red flesh and blood medicine were stored in a jade essence crystal box. Finally, Yi Xian waved his hand and kept these 100 jade essence crystal boxes in his undying world. Chapter 3894. The basic slurry for the preparation of the flesh medicine had finally been refined. It was safe to say that the preparation of the flesh medicine was halfway done. What Yi Xian needed to do next was to add the rare heavenly materials and earthly treasures that were required for the derivation of the level 16 liquid, using the red and green flesh medicine as the basic solution. He would have to fumble again and again to finally produce a stable level 16 liquid. Obviously, the process couldn't be completed in one go. There was no previous experience that he could use as a reference. Also, the all-evil origin fluid had a domineering additional effect that guaranteed success during the preparation of the level 15 liquid. Even if the formula wasn't complete, It could still make up for the deficiencies and make the gene liquid successful. But that was only a situation that would occur before the 16th level of liquid. The level 16 liquid could allow a star state expert at the peak of the 9th rank to become a Star Lord, which was absolutely unbelievable. How many star state experts had been stuck at that step since ancient times, unable to make a breakthrough? Therefore, even though the all-evil origin fluid was a top-grade resource, when one reached the 16th grade, when the formula was incomplete and imperfect, adding the all-evil origin fluid would still make up for the flaws in the formula and guarantee the success rate, but the degree of this effect would definitely be greatly weakened. Too much. Judging from that point of view, even though Yi Xian had successfully obtained the basic slurry for the preparation of the flesh medicine, there was still a long way to go before he could really produce the level 16 liquid. However, 100 portions of the flesh medicine meant 100 mixing chances. Yi Xian was confident that he could produce the level 16 liquid. He could have started right away, but after some consideration, Yi Xian gave up the idea in the end. It made sense to strike while the iron was hot, but he had to know when to stop. Just a moment ago, Yi Xian had tried to refine the flesh and blood medicine 3 times in a row, especially the last time when he finally succeeded. Yi Xian's mind was highly concentrated, and it was continuous. In just half a day, he'd already expended too much mental and physical effort. At this moment, he continued with the second half of the deduction and allocation. It wasn't the best time. After adjusting his state of mind, Yi Xian's figure shot up and directly charged out of the central region's volcano. He arrived outside the volcano's crater and landed on the edge of a plain not far from the crater. As far as his eyes could see, the vast plain ahead was densely packed with ferocious local beasts. There was a small portion of them, about a few 100,000 or so, that was as if they were drunk and were sleeping soundly on the ground. As for the other millions of native beasts, they were gathered around, looking at the few of their companions who were sleeping soundly. Their faces were full of envy, and some of them were still drooling. In another direction, the skeletons of the 9-headed bird and the 1-horned sky-howling tiger were being licked by some of the native beasts. The skeletons were already clean and fleshless, but these beasts were still enjoying it. There was even a queue behind them. It seemed that every batch of beasts could only lick the skeletons for a while before they were done. This scene made Yi Xian's hair stand on end. If this continued, would the ferocious beasts in the back be licking the 2 skeletons or the saliva of the guys in the front? He didn't dare to think about this question further. It was too scary. His back was cold, and his scalp was numb. Sure enough, they were a group of foodies. Their tastes were extraordinarily heavy. Brat, I'm going to cultivate in seclusion. Yes, so am I. I've eaten a little too much this time. I have a feeling that I'm about to break through, and it's a breakthrough of a major realm. It's never happened before. While he was in a daze, the primordial porcupine and primordial hairy tortoise's voices sounded. They were obviously abnormal. Yi Xian turned around and found that the 2 guys were red and swaying as they walked, just like the hundreds of thousands of local ferocious beasts who had fallen asleep on the ground. It was as if they had drunk too much. Yes, I feel like I'm drunk. It wasn't just them, all the Star-Lord realm experts and over 100 local ferocious beasts were the same. Some of them were unable to persist any longer, and had fallen asleep just like the other low-level ferocious beasts. Even though it seemed like they'd drunk too much, there was an extremely dense aura of energy surging within their bodies. Especially the primordial porcupine, the tortoise, and those Star-Lord realm experts. The energy within their bodies was surging too violently, and they were on the verge of being unable to hold it in any longer. They were sleeping. The pores throughout their bodies were emanating the glow of treasures, and it seemed like they were ascending into immortality. This was clearly because they'd eaten a huge amount of flesh and blood from the 9-headed bird and unicorn sky-howl tiger. Those were supreme existences at the quasi-primordial age. Even if it was the region lord realm experts like the porcupine and tortoise, it was no different from immortal pills and miraculous medicines. Even they couldn't eat too much of it. But even then, they were slightly unable to hold on any longer. Their cultivations were about to break through. They were about to break through. Eating meat to the point of getting drunk, this was probably something that no one else could do other than this group of foodies. Yi Xian rolled his eyes, but his heart was filled with joy. The primeval porcupine and primeval hairy tortoise were both at the advanced stage of the region lord realm, and they'd been roasting treasured blood and flesh with the Shenong 4-colored flames in the farmer god cauldron recently. So, the accumulation of treasured blood and flesh within their bodies was almost complete. Now that they'd eaten the flesh of numerous quasi-primordial experts, it was equivalent to being injected with treasured blood and flesh. A strong medicine. Under such circumstances, their breakthrough in cultivation had finally arrived. If nothing unexpected occurred, then both the primeval porcupine and primeval turtle would advance a step further after this period of closed-door cultivation. They would advance from the region Lord Realm into the World Lord Realm, and they'd become two formidable old geezers at the World Lord Realm. If that was the case, then Xian would finally have two old geezers at the World Lord Realm under his command, which would definitely be of great significance and boost his confidence. In addition, the dozens of native Star Lord beasts had obviously eaten a lot of quasi-primordial experts' blood and flesh. Those guys were about to enter seclusion, and some of them would definitely break through the barrier of a major level. After all, some of the native beasts were already at the World Lord Realm. They were already in the advanced phase of the Star Lord state. Even if only a third of them made the breakthrough, there would be a dozen new region lords under Yi Xian's command by then. Apart from them, there were also the hundreds of native universe lords. Some of them would be able to advance to the Star Lord state. Further down, there were hundreds of thousands of native beasts below the universe state. Some of them might be able to become universe lords. Chapter 3895. As the primordial porcupine and primordial hairy tortoise led a group of high-level indigenous vicious beasts into collective seclusion, Yi Xian also felt bored in the farmer god cauldron. After throwing some cultivation resources to the 8 great Vajras, he went to the mountain wall cage at the bottom of the volcano in the central region to look at Lion Wan, who had already become his servant. Jin. This guy was still sleeping, but his condition was much better. There was a faint aura of energy fluctuations in his body. It seemed that it was very likely that he had recovered some of his strength. However, his Tao foundation had already been seized. Even if he recovered, he could forget about returning to his previous peak state. Even if there was hope, everything would have to start all over again. Afterwards, Yi Xian soared into the sky and rushed out from the mouth of the Shenong cauldron that was filled with 9-colored fog. His figure appeared outside the black hole of life. Calculating the time, it had been nearly 3 days since Yi Xian left the netherworld cauldron and returned to the black hole of life to begin seclusion. The harvest of these 3 days could not be said to be small. It was simply shocking. Not only did he recultivate the ancient cave void tactics, synchronizing his cultivation method with his physical body's blood chi realm, but it also led his physical body's blood chi realm to increase by 2 small levels. Now, his cultivation method of the ancient cave void tactics and his physical body's blood chi realm had both reached the cosmic 7th order. With another 2 small breakthroughs, he would be able to use the level 15 liquid and advance to the level 15 realm in one fell swoop, becoming a true almighty figure of the universe. In addition, the basic medicinal paste needed to concoct the level 16 liquid had also been successfully refined this time. The level 16 liquid had been lingering in Yi Xian's heart for a long time, causing him to be unable to let go of it. But now that half of the problem had been solved, Yi Xian felt much more relaxed. Finally, the 2 vicious beast emperors, led by the primordial porcupine and primordial hairy tortoise, had also obtained a lot of good fortune this time and began seclusion one after another. It was believed that once they finished their seclusion, the overall strength of the entire indigenous vicious beast tribe would definitely leap to a whole new level. This was the true strength that Yi Xian had in his hands, just like Triumph City. It was absolutely significant to him. Yi Xian was already overjoyed, but what excited him the most was that the headless corpse had secretly tampered with the netherworld cauldron. Yi Xian felt like he was floating in the air when he thought about how the precious ancient treasure that was on the same level as the Shenong cauldron would soon belong to him. Apart from the netherworld furnace, the products inside the netherworld furnace, which means every drop of all evil origin elixir in the future, will be mine. No one can take it away from me. All right. The netherworld cauldron and the farmer god cauldron are ancient artifacts of the same level. There's basically no chance that the evil origin liquid stored in the netherworld cauldron will be forcefully taken away. As he muttered to himself, a wisp of bright light flashed through Yi Xian's eyes, and he seemed to be lost in thought. However, we must be on guard against those high-end forces of the enemy that are crying piteously for food. No matter what, we must sever the channel through which the netherworld furnace supplies evil origin elixir to them. Those rune chains must be destroyed. With that in mind, Yi Xian didn't stay any longer. He waved his hand and stored the farmer god cauldron into his undying world. Then, he waved his hand and summoned the void-shattering shuttle. He stepped into it, activated the concealment array, and shot out, charging out of the black hole of life in the blink of an eye. After the previous refinement, the void-shattering shuttle was now a true starry sky treasure. Its speed was so fast that it was shocking. Even a large fortress with a diameter of 100,000 meters couldn't compare to it. Even Domain Lord Old Monsters couldn't compete with the void-shattering shuttle in terms of speed when traversing the void with their physical bodies. Even Sector Lord Old Monsters had the qualifications to compete with the void-shattering shuttle in terms of speed. The black hole of life wasn't far from the Demon Domain Pass. Xianxia activated the void-shattering shuttle and traveled at extreme speed. Soon, he plunged into the Demon Domain and headed straight for the Demon Emperor planet. This time, he took the Headless Infant suggestion and decided not to participate in the attack on the Dark Furnace in the root of all evil. He would only push in the dark and guard the Demon Emperor planet. With his methods, he would attract a group of Sector Lord Old Monsters and even universe-level supreme existences to be his gunmen. Although the dangers of the Dark Furnace were already known to everyone in the three major dimensions by now. Otherwise, the root of all evil Star Domain wouldn't have remained untouched after the previous incident. After all, what happened that day was too shocking. The Eye of Heaven's Way's supreme ferocious power had scared countless people out of their wits. The two Sector Lord Old Monsters of the indigenous ferocious beast race couldn't even last one round in front of it and were directly killed. But even so, Xianxia was still confident that he could attract a large number of gunmen to gather in the root of all evil Star Domain. Men die for wealth, and birds die for food. This was an unchanging truth since time immemorial. Among the Starry Sky Masters, there was never a lack of existences who would rather tie their heads to their waists and take risks to fight for great fortunes. In fact, Xianxia could be considered such people. Otherwise, if he hadn't taken risks to fight for a fortune, he wouldn't have been able to go all the way to where he was today. The origin of all evil and the Netherworld Furnace were indeed dangerous, but as long as the Sector Lord Old Monsters behind the various top powers and races of the three Great Planes, and even the supreme existences of the universe, knew how astonishing the good fortune that was being condensed in the Netherworld Furnace was, at that time, there was no need for anyone to persuade them. Those old guys would automatically come knocking on the door and even fight to the death for it. In this regard, Xianxia could be considered to have prepared for a rainy day. In fact, he had already made preparations. Of course, once he threw out the clues in his hands, with the brains and insight of those super old monsters, they would definitely be able to guess the truth. They would be able to see that someone wanted to use them as gunmen while they hid in the dark, wanting to benefit from the fisherman's jar. But this didn't matter. Xianxia wasn't afraid that they would see through this. This was because his goal was only to borrow the hands of this group of super old monsters to destroy the runic chains that transported the all-evil origin elixir out of the Netherworld Furnace. He didn't want to touch the Netherworld Furnace and the all-evil origin elixir stored within. In other words, even if those super old monsters successfully destroyed all the rune chains that transported the all-evil origin liquids out of the Dark Furnace and fulfilled Yixian's wish, Yixian still wouldn't show up. This was an open scheme. He wasn't worried at all that those super old monsters would steal his fortune. Given the grade of the Dark Furnace, the universe-level remains of the primordial creatures of the primordial era were merely the lowest standard of raw materials for its condensed products. What right did those super old monsters have to force their way into the Dark Furnace? Inside, take what they want? Swish! Under the control of Xianxia, the void-shattering shuttle didn't stop at all. It directly broke through the inner line of defense of the three stars of the Demon Emperor Star, and noiselessly plunged into the atmosphere of the Demon Emperor Star, shooting toward the Demon Emperor City. Chapter 3896. There were more than 10 Demon Imperial Royal Family experts who flew from the Demon Imperial City to welcome them. Led by the Demon Emperor Mo Wentian, Yixian had seen them before, but he was not familiar with them. Among the Demon Imperial Royal Family, Grandpa Mo and Grandpa Mo Qigong, who were the closest to him, were still leading the Four Clans Alliance army to conquer the First Universe's slave clans one by one. As for the Demon Emperor Mo Rentian, he was a Sector Lord Old Monster. He wasn't even in the Demon Imperial City, but somewhere that was connected to the Demon Imperial planet through a stable space tunnel. It was equivalent to the ancestral land of the Demon Dwellers. He wouldn't show himself easily. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Yixian was led to the royal palace deep in the Demon Imperial City. Everyone sat down. Yixian did not immediately mention the matter of the source of all evil. Instead, he first asked about the situation of the three Great Planes in the past few days. After all, the First Universe was now in a full-scale expedition. Although the battlefield was in the First Universe, in fact, it was impossible for the Second and Third Universes not to Pay close attention. It was even very likely that there would be some kind of response. Seeing that Yi Xian had asked, the upper echelons of the demon cultivator immediately spoke one after another. They introduced and explained the situation and new movements of the three great planes in the past few days. To Yi Xian's surprise, there was no unusual movement from the races of the Second Universe Federation recently. Ever since they brought back the clansmen who were detained in the Shenong Cauldron from Yi Xian, they had been quiet. It seemed that the pain of the expedition to the First Universe was completely annihilated in the source of all evil. In the end, they were also ruthlessly extorted by the demon cultivator and young master Linghu. It was as if they were all relieved. The source of all evil was one thing. Even the sector lord level indigenous ferocious beast emperor was instantly killed. It was really possible that the races of the Second Universe Federation would be scared out of their wits. They might not be able to recover for a while. However, it would be unrealistic to say that they would be able to let go of the extortion by young master Linghu and the demon dwellers. According to Yi Xian's estimations, those guys were probably secretly holding back their strength, preparing to wait for the right time to do something bad. However, it didn't matter. Yi Xian didn't care at all. As long as he subdued all the slave races in the First Universe, he was confident that he could forge the First Universe into an iron plate. At that time, the two wormholes that connected the Second Universe and the Third Universe, respectively, would be heavily guarded by him. Even if the other party wanted to do something bad, he was afraid that they would be powerless. As for the human clan in the Third Universe, although there was nothing unusual about the Immortal Dynasty, the human clan's Tenju Celestial Palace had a piece of explosive news 2 days ago. Several Star-Lord vice-chiefs of the Renjue Palace had been slain by the invincible war god when they were hunting him down. Then, when the invincible war god reappeared 2 days later, he had already proven his Tao and become a universe dominator in such a short time. Even Master Void Ladle, who was only at the peak of the Cosmos realm at the beginning, also became a Star-Lord thanks to the fortuitous encounter. The Third Universe was in an uproar as soon as the news was spread. The invincible war god's name resounded in the three planes again. It had to be noted that the invincible war god wasn't very strong when he was first born. Nobody expected that he would prove his Tao in such a short time. It was an astonishing speed. What was even more shocking was not that he could control a Star-Lord level old monster, the Void Ladle, but that he was constantly being hunted down by the overlord of the Cultivation Camp, the Tenju Celestial Palace, while he was rapidly increasing his cultivation base. He was indeed worthy of his title as a peerless genius, to be able to grow at an unimaginable speed in the face of adversity. Unfortunately, until now, there was still no definite answer as to who this devouring treasured body that was known as the invincible war god belonged to. There were all sorts of guesses in the outside world, but in the end, there was no solid evidence that could completely convince people. Then there was the situation in the First Universe. After Yi Xian left the allied army of the four clans, the allied army of the Devil Cultivator, Space Rat, Hell Ant, and Giant Ferocious clan led by Grandpa Remo immediately reorganized their army and continued on to the next slave clan after subduing the Ashwolf clan. However, the alliance of 10,000 races wasn't thwarted because of that. After learning that the coalition army of the four races was about to set off again, all the races in the alliance were mobilized and gathered their forces to resist the enemy. And now, after the allied forces of the four clans had taken down the second slave clan after the Ashwolf clan, they were on their way to the next clan. It was estimated that they would arrive at that clan in 2 or 3 days and start a new war. In general, the coalition army of the four races had formed. Even if all the other slave races in the First Universe were unwilling to be enslaved and formed the alliance of 10,000 races, the final result of this all-out war on the plane level basically didn't have much suspense. In the end, more than 80% of the victory would be taken by the coalition army of the four races. At that time, the First Universe would be unified again, and the demon race would become the second overlord of the plane after the Tianji race. I won't leave for the time being. I'll stay on the Demon Emperor planet or in the surrounding star areas and pay close attention to the development of the root of all evil. After understanding the recent developments in the three universes, Yi Xian suddenly changed the topic and threw out a heavy bomb. If I'm not wrong, in 2 or 3 days, the races of the Second Universe Federation and the human race of the Third Universe will gather again. The root of all evil will gather again. As for the First Universe, the interstellar war on the plane level is still in full swing. I guess the races won't have the time to care about this. Of course, if the other slave races insist on getting involved, they'll be digging their own graves. We can't do anything about it. Later, find a way to spread the news and inform the space rat race, the hell ant race, the giant ferocious race, and all the races subdued by the coalition army of the 4 races. In short, within our own race, no one is allowed to get involved in the root of all evil this time. Let's leave the whole star area of the root of all evil to the top forces and races of the 2nd and 3rd universes. It's the same for the demon race. It's best to stay far away. There's no need to stay close to them. Because this time, the big races and the top forces won't send a large number of battleships to form an army like the last time. If there's no accident, in 2 or 3 days, the forces sent by the big forces and secret races will all be high-end battle forces formed by a small number of great beings. The Sector Lord level isn't the limit. This time, it's very likely that even the universe level and immortal level supreme beings will appear. Chapter 3897. As Yi Xian finished speaking, the entire imperial palace was in an uproar. All the upper echelons of the imperial demon race whispered to each other and discussed. Universe level and immortal level supreme existences are about to appear? Gathering at the root of all evil? The demon emperor Mo Wen sucked in a breath of cold air. He looked at Yi Xian with his mouth agape and said in shock, "What's going to happen this time?" The other upper echelons of the imperial demon race all turned their heads and looked over. Their faces were full of shock and strangeness. Because some people had realized that this incident might be related to this monstrous young man in front of them. Before the root of all evil incident began, he had already warned the demon race in advance that it was best not to participate. Otherwise, it would be too late for regrets. In the end, reality proved his words right. Practically all the top-rate powers and clans in the 3 dimensions that had entered the root of all evil to seize the fortune there had been annihilated, and even the 8 region lords had been saved by this young master before him. Not only did he seize this opportunity to detain the 8 domain lords and millions of battleships, as well as the hundreds of millions of universe masters in the battleships, he even abducted the millions of native ferocious beasts led by the immemorial porcupine and the immemorial hairy tortoise. Now they were his private army. It could be said that the biggest and only winner of the previous root of all evil incident was this man in front of them. Considering that he had foreseen the final result before the incident, although he didn't say it, all the upper echelons of the imperial demon race knew that this incident was most likely secretly planned by him. At least, he played a role in adding fuel to the fire. Now, ever since the last incident, not to mention the inside of the root of all evil, even the surrounding star domains outside of that star domain was almost dead silent. None of the powerhouses of the various races in the first universe dared to get too close. Under such circumstances, this man in front of them suddenly threw out such a heavy bomb. He said that in 2 or 3 days, all the major races and top forces of the 3 dimensions would gather at the root of all evil again. And this time, even though there wouldn't be large amounts of space fleets appearing, the various races and pinnacle powers flocking over would actually have sector lord level, universe level and even undying level ancestors personally arriving. This was simply terrifying. There was no doubt that if there was such a thing, the person behind all this must be this young master in front of him. How could this just be called audacious? He hadn't even reached the 15th realm, universe realm. Last time, he had toyed with the Star Lord and Domain Lord old monsters and accidentally dragged down the 2 Sector Lord old monsters. This time, he actually went straight to Sector Lord level, universe level and undying level. This was simply the rhythm of ascension. If things went wrong, not to mention the root of all evil star field in the first universe, even the entire 3 Great Plains would be destroyed by him. Thinking of this, the Devil Emperor Mo Wen-Tian's face immediately turned green. After asking the first question, before Yi Xian could respond, he had already continued in a panic. He advised earnestly and patiently, and his tone clearly revealed a bit of pleading. "I say, little friend, no. My little ancestor, can we stop messing around? Last time, you killed 2 Sector Lord old monsters. This time, listening to your tone, the Sector Lord level is actually the bottom level, and above that is the universe level. And undying level ancestors are going to be alarmed. This is the rhythm of people dying. Can we stop messing around? Calm down a little. Obediently take down the slave races of the first universe first, and unify the entire first universe's dimension. This is a matter of 90% certainty, unlike what you said just now, which is a 90% chance of survival." Hearing these words, Yi Xian was dumbfounded. He stared blankly at the Devil Emperor Mo Wen-Tian, his face full of speechlessness. The upper echelons of the demon race in the hall nodded repeatedly like chickens pecking rice. If it was said that the unforeseen event in the root of all evil starfield last time made them all fearful of Yi Xian, and felt that this guy was simply a little devil in the chaos. Then now, when Xian said that he was going to mess around there again, and this time, besides the Sector Lord old monsters, even the Universe level and Undying level masters would be involved, the upper echelons of the Imperial Demon clan in the hall could no longer find the words to describe the monstrous level of the man in front of them. This Jane was a poison. Wherever she went, there was no way to stop it. All right, this young master admits, this matter this time was caused by me again. To be precise, this young master is about to do it. Since everyone in the hall was smart, after what happened last time, they all guessed that he was the mastermind behind the scenes. Xian didn't plan to hide it and openly admitted it. Then he rolled his eyes and continued, "But don't worry this time, not only will our camp prohibit anyone from getting involved, even I will not take a single step into the root of all evil Starfield. After all, this time the Sector Lords are probably just cannon fodder. Many of the Universe levels will die, even the Undying levels will probably fall a few. This young master is not afraid of death, but I don't want to actively seek death. Over there, let them mess around, we won't participate, but there shouldn't be a problem if the final goal is achieved. This is a foreshadowing, the benefits may only appear many years later, but I know in my heart. As an ally, I ask the demons to believe in this young master's plans and arrangements. Since he had already said so, if there were any objections, they wouldn't even be allies anymore. Furthermore, although this matter was dangerous, it was simply hair-raising, but it wasn't like everyone didn't know the methods of this young master in front of them. Until now, when had he ever suffered a loss? Thinking of this, the upper echelons of the demons all shook their heads and smiled bitterly. Although they didn't say anything, it was obvious that they accepted it tacitly. Here is a video image. This young master took the scene in the Netherworld furnace. Seeing that the upper echelons of the demon royal family in the hall had been convinced, Xian casually threw out a jade scroll and said, "Spread it through a certain channel, don't leave any traces, let others know that it's related to the demon race. Other than that, find someone to spread some words. In short, use the fastest speed. Let all the races and powers in the 3 big planes hear these words and see this video." The video that Xian was talking about was everything that he had seen and heard in the Netherworld furnace. It was all recorded by the devouring system in his body, and now, he had only made a copy and handed it over to the demon royal family. Chapter 3898. This video was automatically recorded by the devouring system in Xian's body when he was in the Netherworld furnace. Everything that Xian saw at that time was completely recorded. It included the remains of the primordial supremes and powerful beings that were hunted by the Netherworld furnace and thrown into the furnace, as well as the scene in the mysterious void outside the Netherworld furnace. In other words, this video not only affected the situation of the Netherworld furnace, but also some situations in the mysterious void where the Netherworld furnace went to hunt. The situation in the void rifts was reflected in the video to a certain extent. If not, the Demon Emperor Mo Wentian would not be so shocked. It should be noted that this time, what he saw was a mysterious and unknown universe plane filled with countless void rifts. Within those void rifts were the corpses and bodies of powerful beings from the primordial era, who had either died or been severely injured. This kind of video had never appeared in the 3 universes before. Through it, all the starry sky experts and ordinary people in the 3 universes would realize a fact. That was, there must be a large number of similar mysterious planes and voids outside the 3 universes that were known today. What was hibernating in them, or what was left behind, were all of the same thing. Some of the powerful beings from the primordial era who only existed in legends. Moreover, the terrifying Netherworld furnace in the depths of the origin of all evil in the first universe had clearly found one of these places. It had completed a hunt there and obtained a large number of remains of powerful beings from the primordial era and even supreme beings from the primordial era. This is too big. What does the Netherworld furnace want to do? All the raw materials are the remains of beings above the immortal level. Is it going to grind them up with the huge millstone in the furnace to refine something? Withdrawing his spiritual power from the Jade Scroll, the Demon Emperor Mo Wentian turned to Xian in horror and said in a trembling voice, "Refining something with such a level of flesh and blood? Not to mention the immortal level, even beings above the immortal level would go crazy for it. This is going to cause chaos in the 3 universes. This is going to lead to chaos. Who cares? It has nothing to do with us anyway." Xian once again threw out a video. It was a video of the Netherworld furnace breaking the rune chains on its own in the root of all evil star region. Then he said, "Hurry up and spread these 2 videos." At the same time, Explain that the runic chains extending from the bottom of the outer wall of the netherworld furnace are connected to various unknown voids. The product refined in the furnace is called the all-evil origin liquid, and it will be transported out through these chains. That's right, the all-evil liquid is the final product of the netherworld furnace. It's extremely effective for sector lords, universe level, immortals, and even primordial supreme beings. It's the best at healing injuries and can even improve life levels. It's a top-notch supreme resource. As the chief servant race of the Heaven's legacy race, the demons were also important scouts, so there was naturally no need to doubt their ability to gather intelligence. They had many secret connections, and some even came from the Federation in the second universe and some powerful forces in the third universe's human camp. This was very normal. The demon dwellers' ability to infiltrate was very strong, and they looked no different from the human race. After infiltrating some races and forces, they would hibernate and slowly develop. In the long run, this would be a line. With this kind of accumulation method, just the 2 videos that Yixian took out were simply a piece of cake for him to silently spread without a trace. In just half a day, these 2 videos spread throughout the 3 universes, causing an uproar among the various large races and top-notch forces. Just as Yixian had predicted, once the 2 videos spread, some people who believed in conspiracy theories immediately expressed concern. They believed that the person who recorded and spread these 2 videos had bad intentions. If they did not handle this well, the tragedy that had just occurred in the root of all evil star region would happen again. This time, it would happen again. Even so, the various large clans and top forces still took action at the first moment. On the first universe's side, the demons and the space mouse race, hell ant race, giant ferocious race, and other races under the Nameless Alliance had already received Yixian's notice, and they did not intend to participate in this matter. The other servant races of the first universe basically had no time to care about it. The crisis of the survival of their race was getting closer and closer. Who still had the mood to mess with those? The third universe, the first palace of the Tenju Celestial Palace, the overlord of the human camp, Tenju Celestial Palace. As soon as these 2 videos spread, a loud and clear dragon roar sounded in the Tenju Celestial Palace. Several figures waved their hands and tore through the void, stepped in, and disappeared instantly. Among them, a ferocious bloody giant dragon could even be vaguely seen. Almost at the same time, in the territory of the Cultivation camp controlled by the Tenju Celestial Palace, in a relatively remote galaxy void, a black undying dark phoenix with a size of 100,000 feet blasted out from an abandoned star. It soared into the sky, and its huge black phoenix wings flapped gently above its body. A black hole-like whirlpool appeared in the void above it, and the undying dark phoenix plunged headfirst into it. The same or similar scene appeared one after another in the territory of the human cultivation camp, including the Tenju Celestial Palace's Earth-Ju Celestial Palace and Human-Ju Celestial Palace, as well as some ancestral lands of other sects that did not belong to the Tenju Celestial Palace. These figures that moved after hearing the news were at least sector lord level, and there were even universe level and immortal level. They were definitely the overlords of an area, but now they swarmed over. It was still the third universe, the imperial capital of the human race's technology camp's immortal dynasty, the Immortal Star. The imperial teacher's palace in the outer city area of the immortal imperial city. To be precise, it was actually the underground of the imperial teacher's palace. What appeared in front of them was a huge underground hall. The hall was incomparably vast. No matter which direction they looked at it from, they could not see the end of it. Besides, although it was underground, when they looked up, the bluestone dome of this vast underground hall was at least 10,000 meters high. An underground space of such a scale was not a small project, and it was even more impossible for it to appear under the immortal imperial city. Hence, this underground hall should have been built using space folding technology. This was the secret base of the imperial tutor, D-Air, in the immortal imperial city. The hall was originally empty, and there was nothing in it. However, at this moment, because this place was too vast, there was no way to distinguish the direction of the hall. With a flash of green light, a high platform appeared in the originally empty hall in the blink of an eye. It was square in shape, and each side was 100 meters long. Right. Xiao. Chapter 3899. It's time to open another seal. As D-Air muttered to himself, there seemed to be a dim light flashing in his body. Then, his aura began to soar at a visible speed. At first, D-Air's aura was only at the peak of the 9th rank universe realm. However, it only took half an instant for him to break through the universe realm and reach the Star-Lord state. However, that was obviously just the beginning. After reaching the Star-Lord state, it only took 3 breaths for Air's cultivation to reach the peak of the 9th rank Star-Lord state. Then, he broke through again and became a Zone Lord in the blink of an eye. However, that wasn't the end. Air's aura was still rising in the Zone Lord state. This time, it only took him 6 breaths to reach the peak of the 9th rank Zone Lord state. Then, he broke through again and reached the Sector Lord state. In this realm, Air used 9 breaths of time to increase his strength. In the end, his cultivation finally stabilized and stopped growing. He had reached the peak of the 9th stage of the Sector Lord realm. At the same time, a black hole appeared in the square in front of the boundless underground folded space. It appeared out of thin air and was extremely mysterious. Through the black hole, one could see that there was a mysterious void space inside. There were a large number of battleships and giant mechanical creatures that looked like space fortresses of various shapes. Roar! A huge roar like a tiger's roar came from the black hole. Then, a behemoth stepped out of the black hole, followed by a second one. In the end, 4 giant alloy beasts that were as large as mountains appeared in the vast square. They hovered in the air and emitted a terrifying aura that surpassed Air's. Air was already at the peak of the 9th rank Sector Lord state. However, the 4 alloy beasts were even stronger than him. Obviously, they were at least at the universe realm. At this time, the black hole behind the 4 alloy behemoths had quietly disappeared, but another slightly smaller black hole appeared again strangely out of thin air. The 4 alloy behemoths shrank until they were only about 1,000 feet in size. After making a soft sound at Air, they stepped into the black hole and disappeared in the blink of an eye. *T. At the same time, in the Dormelda pavilion deep in the inner city of the immortal Imperial City, a few streaks of light rushed out and directly shot into the sky. There was no spatial crack at all, but these streaks of light strangely disappeared halfway through their flight. Such a scene occurred in many other places in the territory of the Immortal Dynasty, including the 3 empires under the rule of the dynasty, as well as the headquarters and ancestral lands of the top families and forces such as Bodhi Technology, the Shenyuan family, the Longyu family, the Shinta family, and the Life Gene Society. As for the Heavenly Battle Empire, Patriarch Zhan Lu, one of the 2 patriarchs, happened to return. Not only did he break through the Star-Lord state and become a region lord, he had even reached the peak of the 9th level. There was no telling what kind of fortuitous encounters he had during his years of travel, but his strength had soared too quickly. The Second Universe. Apart from the Nether Tortoise clan, which had been completely sealed, a large number of races, including the Blood Dragons, the Cyan Rock, the Battle Lions, the Inji clan, the Raging Bulls, the Golden Eagles, the Colorful Pythons, the Greedy Wolves, the Tree Spirits, and the other top 10 races, also heard the news. They all responded. Almost every race had 1 or 2 immortal lords and even universe-grade patriarchs awakened. They tore through the void and swarmed towards the origin of all evil star domain of the first universe. In the secret realm of the Blood Dragon's ancestral land, an enormous cloud of blood was still rolling in the void thousands of kilometers away. They could vaguely see a 9-headed blood dragon roaring furiously. Although its aura was not as strong as the supreme beings of the primordial era such as the Golden Divine Dragon and the primordial Yuxia, it was no weaker than the almighty beings of the primordial era such as the Void Ladle. The 9-headed blood dragon had clearly been seriously injured and was recovering thanks to the nourishment of the all-evil origin fluid. In the past, a drop of the all-evil origin fluid would drip from the end of the chain every year. However, the 9-headed blood dragon wouldn't consume all of it. It would leave behind a quarter of it and infuse it into the huge blood-colored egg that was surging up and down in the blood cloud's central domain. That was its direct descendant. Once it was born, it would possess the cultivation of the universe realm, and its future would be limitless. However, not long ago, the 9-headed blood dragon was poisoned by Black Mark during the last resource supply. It was ambushed by Yi Xian's all-evil poison. Its injuries, which had recovered by 60 to 70%, worsened again. Now, its cultivation had fallen to the quasi-primordial supremes level. But even so, when the news of the source of all evil star domain came again, the 9-headed blood dragon was still alarmed. At this time, it roared furiously and looked back at the blood-colored giant egg in the rolling blood clouds. Its body instantly emitted a monstrous anger of incomparable resentment. Roar! Even his roar faintly revealed a bit of mournful intent. Then, the 9-headed blood dragon's figure disappeared into the rolling blood cloud. After a short while, An energy body clone rushed out of the blood cloud and plunged into the rune chain that was suspended at the highest point of the secret realm. It then disappeared. Such a scene was not only playing out in the ancestral land of the Blood Dragon clan. Several other clans in the top 10 clans of the Second Universe also had an existence whose cultivation had fallen to the quasi-primordial Supremes level. In the form of an energy body clone, they followed the rune chain that supplied them with the all-evil origin fluid every year and angrily rushed toward the source of all evil star domain in the First Universe. Go. For example, in the secret realm of the Green Rock clan's ancestral land, an azure rock that was hundreds of thousands of feet tall rushed out. In the ancestral land of the Battle Lion clan, which ranked third among the top 10 clans in the Second Universe, a blood-colored two-headed battle lion roared angrily at the sky. In the end, it also rushed into the rune chain in the form of an energy body clone. In addition to these bloodline ancestors of the various clans who had not appeared in the world, they were all alarmed. In some remote star domains in the three universes, from time to time, void cracks would quietly open, revealing huge figures with extremely terrifying auras. Chapter 3900. The Root of All Evil. Rumble. Kacha, kacha. The vast void was empty, and there was no one in sight, but two sounds could be heard in the void. The rumbling of thunder was the sound of the huge millstone turning in the furnace. Both sounds were very low, and they were not very hurried. Instead, they seemed to be a little slow and sluggish. Originally, they should not have such a soul-stirring effect, but when they entered the ears, it made one's body tremble uncontrollably. The strange cracking noises were the sound of the flesh and blood of a large number of powerful primordial creatures being crushed by the cauldron, turning into minced meat and bones. The scene that could be seen inside the furnace could be said to be truly terrifying. The vast interior of the furnace was divided into two areas. The central area was a huge millstone with two levels, and there was a hole in the middle. At this time, there were many desolate creatures' corpses in this huge hole, moving up and down as the two levels of the millstone turned in reverse. It was like a real furnace of flesh and blood. If someone was here, they could even see the corpses of some terrifying creatures like the Golden Divine Dragon in this huge hole. They should be the descendants of the Golden Divine Dragon that hadn't reached the level of the Desolate Supreme yet. Even so, this Golden Divine Dragon should be extremely powerful. Even though it had died countless years ago, and only half of its body was left, one could still feel a powerful pressure coming from it. There were also countless other powerful beings from the primordial era. Originally, there had been thousands of them, but now, there were only about 1,000 of them around the giant millstone. The rest were all thrown into the hole in the center of the millstone. At this time, as the huge furnace of flesh and blood slowly turned, all the desolate creatures' corpses in the center of the millstone were being crushed. Gradually, their original appearances were unrecognizable. Whether it was the Golden Divine Dragon, the Desolate Xianxia, the Blood Slaughter Lion, or the Azure Sky Rock, all the desolate creatures' corpses were crushed into meat paste and mixed together. During this process, the flesh and bones mixed with each other, and the blood of different colors mixed with each other. In the end, the flesh and blood could no longer be distinguished from each other. There was no longer any solid matter in the huge hole, but there were still endless rays of light shooting up into the sky. Some of them even dissipated in the void. They were things like karma or the past, things that were seen as impurities and were not retained by the furnace of flesh and blood. There were also some that turned into strands of milky white mist that slowly rose into the air and merged into the thin atmosphere above the cauldron. The milky white mist was the nether furnace milk that was formed by something similar to the connate Tao origins or nascent spirit origins. The fragments of the innate Taos and Yuan Shen were smashed into tiny molecules that could be traced back to their original form. They turned into pure energy and merged into the atmosphere above the furnace. As they accumulated, their density increased and finally turned into this milky white liquid of the dark furnace elixir. This kind of lotion had an extremely miraculous effect. After all, it was condensed from the essence energy of a large number of powerful creatures that were close to or had even reached the level of the Desolation era. It was simply shocking and horrifying. However, it was obvious that they were not the real purpose of the furnace of flesh and blood to refine the desolate creatures' corpses. They were only some byproducts that could be used during the process and would be a waste to discard them. The real product of the dark furnace elixir was the transparent liquid that flowed out from the almost non-existent gap between the two layers of the millstone. The all-evil origin elixir. These powerful desolate era creatures were of different species. Some of them were golden, and their blood was as bright as the sun, emitting a dazzling golden light. Some of them were burning with blood-red flames, releasing an endless killing intent and evil aura. The blood, flesh and marrow of the desolate era creatures of this level would turn into an indescribably weird color after they were crushed into mud, and their auras were extremely chaotic and terrifying. But at this moment, as some impurities such as memories, karma, and so on turned into green smoke and disappeared, and as some unnecessary innate energy was expelled, the liquid rose and condensed into liquid. In the end, the liquid that flowed out from a thin crack at the edge of the furnace was incomparably transparent and colorless. It didn't even emit any aura of pressure. The liquid was as pure as the purest crystal in the world. In the huge hole in the center of the furnace, a huge amount of 9-colored blood mud was rolling. Above the blood mud, the karma impurities, and the milky white mist were also turning into smoke. However, the transparent liquid that flowed out from the gap on the edge of the furnace was dripping drop by drop. After a long time, only one drop fell into the groove under the gap. All of this was the scene inside the netherworld furnace, and it couldn't be seen from the outside. Anyone outside the netherworld furnace could only roughly judge the situation inside through the milky white liquid above the mouth of the furnace and the rumbling thunder and cracking sounds coming from inside the furnace. At this moment, the last batch of thousands of desolate era creatures' corpses were also pulled into the huge hole in the center of the millstone of the central region by the power of the netherworld furnace's internal field. Then, the low buzzing and cracking sounds came out. This continued for about half a day, and then it gradually weakened again. But now, the milky white mist at the mouth of the cauldron that was like the atmosphere of the stars was already very, very thick. Even though the rumbling of thunder still existed within the netherworld furnace, that kind of strange cracking sound that made one's scalp go numb was almost inaudible. All the corpses of the desolate era creatures had been crushed into meat paste, and their original shapes couldn't be seen anymore. Although the bloodline ancestors of the various races and top forces who were hibernating in the void far away from the netherworld furnace didn't see this scene with their own eyes, they could easily deduce it. Finally, someone couldn't hold back and suddenly made a move. Fellow Taoists, the raw materials have been crushed into meat paste, and the condensation has begun. It can't be stopped. The time has come. A giant beast rushed out, and a figure stood on its back. It was an ancestor of the 10 Ultimate Celestial Palace of the Earth Ultimate's Palace of the Third Universe. This master and servant were both terrifying late-stage sector lords. They were the first to shoot towards the netherworld furnace. The all-evil origin elixir is about to be produced. We have to break the transportation chains immediately. Otherwise, everyone's efforts will be in vain. Screech! How dare you! If you dare to break the chains of the netherworld furnace, our race will fight to the death with your 10 Ultimate Celestial Palace. A purple-gold giant eagle suspected to be from the Golden Eagle race of the top 10 races of the Second Universe soared into the sky. It was tens of thousands of feet long, and the aura in its body surged as it followed closely behind. Chapter 3901. Screech! How dare you! If you dare to break the chains of the netherworld furnace, our clan and your 10 Ultimate Celestial Palace will fight to the death. A purple-gold giant eagle that was suspected to be from the Golden Eagle clan, one of the top 10 clans in the Second Universe, leaped into the air. Its wingspan spanned tens of thousands of feet, and the aura in its body surged as it rushed out. Its target was not the netherworld furnace, but the master and servant of the Ultimate Celestial Palace who wanted to break the transmission chains of the netherworld furnace. This scene was strange, but the terrifying existences that were hibernating in the surrounding void did not seem surprised, as if they had already expected this situation. That's right, this time, the patriarch-level existences from the various clans and top forces in the second and third universes came to the source of all evil star domain for completely different purposes. It could even be said that they came in opposite directions. The two camps of the human race in the third universe, including some old monsters from the myriad Luo Federation Senate, and some idle patriarch-level figures from various parts of the three dimensions, came to the source of all evil for the same purpose: to break the rune chains that transported the all-evil origin liquid out of the netherworld furnace. Passage. Then, they would think of a way to obtain the all-evil origin liquid in the netherworld furnace. However, the bloodline patriarchs from the various clans in the Second Universe's Federation did not come here to seize the fortune in the netherworld furnace, but to prevent the rune chains from being broken. This was because the bloodline patriarchs of the various clans in the Second Universe were basically the same as the 9-headed Blood Flood Dragon of the Blood Flood Dragon clan and other terrifying existences. They had vested interests in the products of the netherworld furnace. Although the various clans in the Second Universe had previously launched an army of 10 million battleships to conquer the First Universe and charge into the source of all evil star domain. But in fact, even at that time, Their purpose was only to fully control the source of all evil star domain and forbid any other forces from entering to prevent the Venom incident from happening again. Of course, in addition to the bloodline patriarchs of the various clans in the Second Universe's Federation, there were also some idle old monsters from various parts of the three dimensions. Among them, there were also vested interests in the products of the Netherworld furnace. Perhaps on the surface, this group of independent old monsters had nothing to do with the various clans in the Second Universe's Federation, but when it came to the rune chains of the Netherworld furnace, the interests of the two sides were clearly tied together and unknowingly stood on the same side. Golden Eagle Race. Is this the idea of your race, or the idea of the races of the Second Universe? A white-bearded, black-haired, green-robed elder took a step forward. His eyes gleamed as he gazed at the purple gold eagle. His formless eyes shot out sparks of blood as he gazed at it. This was also a universe-level supreme old monster. This person's name was Gong San, and he was originally a Star Lord from the 10 Extreme Celestial Palace. Tens of thousands of years ago, not long after the formation of the 10,000 Luo Federation, the 10 Extreme Celestial Palace, which represented the human cultivation camp, entered the Federation Senate. Today, he had already grown to the universe level and was the second echelon of the Federation Senate. A top-notch elder. Previously, when the various clans of the Second Universe's Federation launched an army of tens of millions of battleships to launch an all-out expedition against the First Universe, the 10,000 Luo Federation was already extremely dissatisfied. Now, a bloodline ancestor of the Golden Eagle race had appeared and was clamoring and threatening the 10 Extreme Celestial Palace. Gong San couldn't bear it anymore and immediately expressed his stance on behalf of the Federation. Golden Eagle, don't forget, the various clans of the Second Universe are also members of the Federation. On the matter of the Netherworld furnace, the Federation Senate has already given clear instructions. I advise you not to go against the wishes of the Federation. What a joke! The various clans of the Second Universe are only members of the 10,000 Luo Federation. We are not subordinates of the Federation. Even the Federation Senate has no right to impose their wishes on our clans and make any compulsory orders. In the distant void, a giant rock with green feathers and countless golden rays of light spread out its wings and rushed out from the void. This should be a bloodline ancestor of the Green Rock clan, one of the top 10 clans of the Second Universe. His strength was comparable to that of Gong San, who was from the Federation Senate. He was also at the universe level. He replied without any trace of politeness, "The products of the Netherworld furnace are closely related to the interests of the various clans of the Second Universe. It is impossible for you not to know this. The human race is also one of the members of the Federation." This time, they ignored the allies of the various clans of the Second Universe and came to the source of all evil to seek the benefits of the Netherworld furnace. Not only did the Senate of the Federation not stop them, but they even colluded with them. It is really cold to the hearts of the various clans. Regarding this matter, the 10,000 Luo Federation must give the various clans of the Second Universe an explanation. Whether it is the 10 absolute sky palaces of the human race, the Undying Dynasty, or the great beings of the Senate of the Federation, they must immediately withdraw from the star field of the source of all evil. Otherwise, they will see the various clans of the Second Universe as nothing. At this point, the universe-level Green Gold Rock's tone turned harsh. He sneered and said, "If you insist on acting alone and ignore the interests of our clans, then it is fine if the various clans of the Second Universe do not join this federation. Today, we will withdraw from the 10,000 Luo Federation. Parting ways in the future is a small matter, but turning against each other and becoming enemies is a big matter. Where do you want to go? I advise you to think twice before you act. Otherwise, the two planes will break apart today. The 10,000 Luo Federation will no longer exist, and all the various clans of the Second Universe will withdraw." Boom! Screech! Roar! Just as this universe-level Green Gold Rock finished speaking, the entire star field of the source of all evil went into an uproar, and the surrounding space was in an uproar. The various super-old monsters, who had hidden themselves in space and had yet to show themselves, were all shocked. The attitude of the bloodline ancestor of the various clans of the Second Universe was too unyielding. He was clearly trying to force the 10,000 Luo Federation to make concessions and withdraw from the star field of the source of all evil with the great beings of the two camps of the human race. Otherwise, all the various clans of the Second Universe would withdraw from the Federation, and the impact would be no different from the collapse of the entire 10,000 Luo Federation. The consequences were too severe. Although the one who said this was only a universe-level bloodline ancestor of the Green Gold Rock race in the Second Universe, This was clearly the common wish of all the core upper echelons of the various clans in the second universe. On the matter of the benefits of the underworld furnace, the various clans of the second universe had already reached a consensus. The words of any bloodline ancestor from any clan represented the collective wishes of the entire clan. At this time, the entire star field of the source of all evil was in an uproar because of the universe-level green gold rock's words. The various super-old monsters from the various clans of the second universe all let out furious roars and screeches at the first moment. The entire star field of the source of all evil was filled with roars and howls. Tens of super-old monsters simultaneously emitted their energies. They were all at least sector lords, and there was no lack of universe-level or even undying beings amongst them.